Hey guys, tonight we're going back, way back, to a time of marble temples, bronze-tipped spears, and lots of dudes arguing in togas. You're about to find out how the Romans, who started as this scrappy underdog city in central Italy, somehow managed to outwit, outfight, and eventually outlast the entire Greek world. And just a heads up, you probably won't survive this. Not because it's dangerous, unless you count boredom as a deadly weapon, but because if you lived in ancient Greece at the time, odds are you'd end up paying taxes to someone named Publius. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I don't need it, pity subscribes. Also, drop your city and time down below in the comments. It's always kind of magical seeing someone in New York drifting off at 11:42 PM while someone in Sydney is having their morning toast with this in the background. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a Greek cliffside city, maybe in the Peloponnese or just outside of Thebes. Below you, stone buildings hug the coast like seashells washed up on the shore. The air smells of olive oil, sea salt, and that peculiar blend of sun-baked marble and goat. You, like most citizens of a Greek polis, which is just a fancy way of saying city-state, think your little patch of land is basically the centre of the universe. Everyone else? Barbarians. Especially the Romans, who are still busy figuring out aqueducts and debating whether it's okay to have kings, spoiler. They decide no. At this point, we're in the 3rd century BCE, and Greece is still dazzling. Politically fractured, yes, but culturally brilliant. The big names like Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates are all dead, but their ideas are very much alive, passed down through scrolls in dusty libraries and wine-fueled symposiums. Athens is more of a museum than a military power now. Sparta's gone from battle-hardened warriors to mildly threatening farmers. And Macedon, yes, Alexander the Great's stomping grounds, is clinging to whatever's left of its legacy now that Alexander himself has been dead for over a century. Over on the western side of things, Rome is quietly becoming a problem. By 264 BCE, Rome has already taken control of most of the Italian peninsula, absorbing Etruscan cities, subduing the Samnites and developing a taste for expansion. But at this point, they haven't yet conquered the world. They're just very efficient at winning ugly wars. Their soldiers aren't the best fighters individually, but they fight like a machine. You break one legion and another one just shows up. And another. It's like ancient whack-a-mole, but in sandals. And here's the thing. Rome doesn't hate Greece. In fact, Roman elites are already low-key obsessed with the Greek stuff. Its drama, philosophy, even its snazzy columns. But admiration doesn't mean friendship. Rome likes to collect things, including other people's territory. The problem is, Greece is just so easy to divide. It's like trying to babysit 14 toddlers who all think they're in charge. Every Greek city has its own government, its own army, its own calendar. Corinth doesn't trust Athens. Athens doesn't trust Sparta. Sparta doesn't even like Sparta half the time. So when external threats come, say, a Macedonian king looking to unify the area, they never quite manage to work together. It's kind of a weird historical irony. Greece gave the world the blueprint for democracy, but they never really figured out how to work as one team. And Rome? Rome had a republic with checks and balances, kind of, but when they needed to unite against an enemy, they showed up like a family of wolves in matching armour. A weird fact here, at one point, ancient Greeks literally voted to send philosophers into exile because they were corrupting the youth. Imagine banning TED Talks because they made teenagers too excited about ethics. And yet, centuries later, Roman kids would grow up studying those same Greeks. Funny how that works. Now, historians are still debating how Greek Greece really was at this stage. Yes, it was the birthplace of philosophy and the Olympic Games, but by the time Rome starts creeping in, a lot of Greece is run by monarchs or military strongmen. The Golden Age? Kind of in the rearview mirror. Was it decline? Was it transformation? Scholars are still grumbling about that over cold coffee and journal footnotes. Anyway, back in Rome, the Senate starts to look eastward with a raised eyebrow. The Carthaginian threat in the west is still ongoing. Yes, we're mid-Punic War, but already Rome is getting dragged into Balkan affairs. First, they notice some pirates off the coast of Illyria, which is like modern-day Albania and Croatia. And wouldn't you know it, some of those pirates are messing with Roman merchant ships. You know what Rome doesn't like? People messing with their imports. So we get a little preview of what's coming. Rome sends a fleet across the Adriatic. Not a big one, just enough to send a message. But when Romans send a message, it usually comes with a sword and a new tax code. Illyrian queens are captured, pirate bases burned, and suddenly the Greek world starts paying attention to this Latin-speaking upstart from across the sea. You'd think the Greeks would unite to prepare for what's coming. Instead, they mostly squabble about whether Rome is a threat or a useful tool. Some even hope Rome might help them against Macedon, which is still flexing its muscle under King Philip V. Yeah, we'll get to him in a bit. For now, just picture a world that's spinning faster than it realises, its old glories fading, and a new power slowly waking up and stretching its legs. So here you are, standing between two civilizations, one proud and ancient, the other ambitious and organised. You can almost feel the marble under your feet warm from the sun, the low hum of the marketplace below, and the quiet sense that something big is about to shift. History doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just rustles like olive branches in a breeze, and by the time you realise what's changed, the world has already turned upside down. Now let's step a little deeper into the noisy, messy world of Greek city-states, a world where every town with a temple and a decent hill thought it was the next Athens. Imagine waking up in a place where your neighbour across the valley speaks your language, worships your gods, eats the same olives, and still thinks you're a menace to civilization. That's the mood across Greece right now. Sparta hates Athens. Athens hates Thebes. Corinth hates everyone equally. It's less a country and more a really angry HOA. You, unfortunately, are stuck right in the middle of it. Maybe you're a soldier from Aetolia, one of those rugged mountain republics with a chip on its shoulder and way too much time to meddle in other people's politics. Or maybe you're an artisan in Athens, dear, watching the glory days of Pericles and Socrates recede into myth while local politicians argue over grain prices and who gets to chair the next festival of Dionysus. The streets are loud, crowded, and weirdly full of goats, and no one can agree on anything, except that things used to be better. While Greek philosophers sit around debating the nature of virtue, their kings and generals are pulling Greece apart at the seams. Macedon is still a looming presence in the north. They're technically Greek, but only technically. Ask an Athenian if a Macedonian is truly Greek and watch the eye twitch begin. Macedon, thanks to Alexander the Great, had its moment in the sun. But after his death in 323 BCE, his vast empire broke apart like an overcooked meatball. Generals turned into kings. Kingdoms turned into target practice. And the Macedonian royal family, let's just say they weren't great at family reunions. By the time we get to King Philip V, yep, the one who will eventually mess up everything, Macedon is trying really hard to stay relevant. He's young, ambitious, and just a little too confident. He wants to restore Macedonian power and maybe unite Greece under his rule. But here's the problem. No one wants to be ruled. Every city-state thinks it deserves independence, freedom, and at least 2 marble statues in its honour. So Philip's attempts at diplomacy usually go something like this. Join me or I will burn your countryside. Not exactly subtle, and while Greece is busy dealing with Philip's leadership style, Rome is starting to sniff around. They're still officially focused on Carthage, but they've already noticed the Greek house is basically on fire and no one's holding a hose. The Romans see an opportunity, not to conquer yet, but to insert themselves as mediators, just trying to help. Rome loves pretending to be the reasonable adult in the room while secretly measuring your walls for new drapes. The deeper problem is that the Greek world's obsession with independence is Achilles' heel. Ironic, right? Each polis guards its sovereignty like a dragon hoards gold. And any time one city starts gaining too much influence, the others immediately form alliances to bring them down. This constant infighting weakens everyone and creates the perfect opening for a more unified, more disciplined outsider. Spoiler. The outsider wears sandals and has really good roads. And just to give you a fun little historical sidebar here, some city-states were so petty that they'd switch sides in a war halfway through just to annoy their rivals. One year you're fighting with Macedon, the next you're fighting against Macedon, and no one even pretends to keep track anymore. Historians have actual charts trying to map this out. It looks like a spilled plate of spaghetti. Now, let's not over-romanticise Greek politics. Yes, there were votes and assemblies, but most of the time the rich ran the show, and the rest of the population hoped the taxes wouldn't go up again. And those philosophical debates about justice and virtue? Yeah, mostly happening in elite circles while the rest of the city argued over who stole whose goat. There's also this growing sense, whispers really, that the glory of Greece is fading. The temples are still beautiful, the statues still shine in the sun, but something's missing. The unity that came briefly during the Persian Wars is long gone, and when they look across the sea and hear about Rome's rising power, some Greeks are nervous, others are intrigued. A few even think maybe they'll fix things around here, which is optimistic. Meanwhile, Rome is building, literally, roads, alliances, trade networks. They're like a colony of ants laying down infrastructure while the rest of the Mediterranean argues over who invented math. They're not glamorous, they don't have plays about hubris and fate, but they're steady, patient, and when they make a friend, it's for life. Or until that friend becomes mildly inconvenient. Greek leagues like the Aetolian League and the Achaean League try to form some kind of unified front. They hold councils, send delegates, debate policies, but again it's like trying to herd philosophers. Everyone talks, no one listens, and half the time they can't even agree who's in charge of the meeting. These leagues were supposed to make Greece stronger, but they mostly become tangled webs of backstabbing and last-minute deal-making. There's actually a quirky fringe theory some scholars toss around that if Greece had developed a stable federal system, like an actual united Greek nation, it might have held off Rome, or at least delayed the inevitable. But that kind of unity just wasn't in the cultural DNA. Everyone was too busy being proud of their particular dialect of Greek and the 3 columns outside their local temple. And so here we are. The Greek world is vibrant but chaotic. Rome is organised and quietly ambitious. Greece still dazzles with its art, philosophy and theatre, but under the surface it's unravelling. Alliances are shaky, kings are reckless, and no one seems to be looking at the bigger picture. Everyone's obsessed with winning their little argument, protecting their little plot of land and making sure their statue is the tallest in the plaza. What they don't realise is that the game board is already changing. The Romans aren't coming with chariots and fire. They're coming with treaties, with trade deals, with requests for cooperation. It doesn't look like conquest yet, but make no mistake, the wheels are turning. And the Greeks, they're too busy arguing over whose olive oil tastes better to notice the shadows creeping in from the west. You don't notice Rome at first. It's quiet, almost polite. No legion storming beaches, no gory sieges, yet. Just a few ambassadors arriving in creaky ships with laurel wreaths on their brows and scrolls tucked under their arms. "Hello, friends of Greece," they say. "We're simply here to discuss peace." Classic move, and maybe you believe them, at least for a while. But Rome never does anything without a longer game in mind. Always watching, always calculating, like a chess player who already knows how the game ends. It's the early 2nd century BCE, and Rome has just wrapped up its little family feud with Carthage, also known as the Second Punic War. Hannibal's elephants are gone. The Italian countryside has been rebuilt. Rome's feeling strong again, and its eyes are drifting eastward. Not for conquest, you understand. No, Rome tells itself it's just protecting trade routes, defending allies, making sure pirates don't ruin the vibe. It's always about helping, but that helping hand, it's wearing a gauntlet. Now look across the Adriatic Sea, up along the coast of modern-day Albania, you find the rugged, pirate-infested region known as Illyria. The Romans decide it's time to clear the decks. Pirates have been raiding Roman merchant ships, and that's a no-go. The Roman Senate sends an army, not a big one, just enough to send a message. And suddenly Queen Teuta of Illyria finds herself very outmatched. Her fleet crumbles, her kingdom shrinks, and Rome sets up friendly governors in the region. Nothing fancy, just a foot in the door. But with Illyria cracked open like a walnut, Greek city-states start to notice. Some are nervous, others opportunistic. The Aetolian League, for example, a confederation of mountain folk and troublemakers, starts wondering if maybe these Romans could help them balance against Macedon. Macedon, still clinging to its Alexander-era ego, is busy puffing out its chest under King Philip V. He's charismatic, a decent general, and completely allergic to good decisions. Philip's ambition is like an unattended campfire. It spreads fast and tends to burn everything in its path. He starts cozying up to other rising powers, including the Seleucid Empire, which controls much of the Near East. The idea? Maybe they can carve up the Aegean while Rome's distracted. But here's the thing about Rome. It's never distracted for long. Philip miscalculates, badly. He allies with Carthage at exactly the wrong time, right as Hannibal is marching elephants through Italy and making Romans very irritable. That move alone triggers the First Macedonian War. You blink and suddenly Roman legions are sailing east, not a massive invasion, more like a military nudge. The Greeks aren't thrilled, but some of them see an opportunity. They join Rome to keep Philip in check. Classic Greek politics. If your neighbour is growing too strong, you side with a foreign power to humble him. The First Macedonian War doesn't exactly end in fireworks. It fizzles. Rome is still fighting Carthage after all, and can't commit fully. They sign a peace treaty with Philip in 205 BCE, and head back west to finish the Hannibal situation once and for all. But something's changed. Rome isn't just a Western power anymore. It's officially on the Greek guest list, and once Rome enters your region, it rarely leaves. Here's a fun historical detail. During this period, Roman ambassadors are travelling through Greece wearing togas in places where people still prefer chitons. They show up to city councils and religious festivals offering advice no one asked for. They look stiff, awkward, slightly smug, but they're there, listening, taking notes. And when they go home, the Senate gets a neatly wrapped intelligence report on who's loyal, who's likely to rebel, and who might be open to becoming a friend of Rome. Not everyone's thrilled. A few Greek thinkers, especially those still holding on to dreams of independence, see the writing on the wall. They grumble in corners of libraries, warning that Rome isn't here to help, it's here to replace. But by now, Greek politics is like a jigsaw puzzle with missing pieces. Everyone is hoping someone else will solve it. Meanwhile, Rome is developing a taste for Greek affairs. They like the climate, they like the trade, they love the drama. And honestly, they love the feeling of being treated like cultured saviours rather than land-hungry invaders. It feeds their national ego. And this is where it gets weird. Because Greece, for all its brilliance, is treating Rome like an exotic novelty. They underestimate them. Think of them as rustic Westerners who are good at marching in formation but not much else. A Roman senator stumbles through a badly accented speech in Athens, and the locals smirk behind their hands. Charming, they say, like someone watching a toddler try to recite Homer. But underestimating Rome? That's how empires fall. An interesting little fringe theory from modern historians suggests that Rome's real genius wasn't military power, it was social engineering. They didn't just conquer people, they offered them membership. Roman alliances came with perks, protection, trade access, and a seat, albeit a small one, at the diplomatic table. Greek states, tired of being stomped on by neighbours, sometimes welcomed Roman friendship the way a drowning man welcomes a leaky lifeboat. But of course, every lifeboat comes with ropes, and Rome's ropes tighten slowly. Now there's still some debate over whether Rome at this point intended to take Greece outright, or if it just sort of happened through a mix of meddling, alliances, and really bad decision-making by everyone else. Some scholars think Rome had a master plan. Others think Rome was just reacting, like a clumsy but determined tourist who ends up owning the hotel after a series of accidents. Either way, they're in. As we round off this phase of the story, Greece is basically a stage filled with squabbling actors, each performing their own monologue, unaware that the script has already been rewritten. Rome has gone from guest to guest of honour. Macedon is eyeing its neighbours. The Aetolians are stirring up drama. And the Achaeans? Oh, they're still pretending everything's fine. But you standing there in the marketplace of a Greek port city can feel the change. The accents sound different. The coins are starting to bear new symbols. The temples still shine, but the people into power now answer letters written in Latin. A new rhythm is settling in, and the old harmony is quietly slipping away. You know that feeling when a stranger says they're just visiting, but slowly starts rearranging your furniture? That's Rome in Greece now. What started as polite diplomacy and a few strategic alliances is becoming something heavier. There's a weight to Rome's presence, like the air just before a summer storm. You can still enjoy the sunlight, sip your wine, gossip about your neighbours, but somewhere in the back of your mind you know things are about to shift. Welcome to the Illyrian Wars, also known as Rome's first real flirtation with Balkan drama. You've already seen them dabble in Illyria, but this time it's personal. The Illyrian coast, with its rocky cliffs and pirate-filled harbours, isn't just a nuisance, it's a major trade artery. The pirates there aren't just sea bandits. They're freelancers backed by local rulers who see Roman merchants as walking purses. That's not good for business. And if Rome loves anything more than conquering, it's profitable business. So around 29 BCE, Rome launches the First Illyrian War. Queen Teuta, who's been tolerating, or let's be honest, encouraging piracy under her rule, suddenly finds herself looking at Roman warships parked right outside her kingdom. She tries diplomacy, but Rome's patience is razor thin. They land troops, take cities, liberate some Greek coastal towns that were under Illyrian control, and just like that, boom, Rome now has allies in the region. Greek city-states along the coast, especially those tired of Illyrian raids, are thrilled. Thanks, Rome, you're the best, they say, offering wreaths, free wine, and awkward dances in temples. But deep down, some of them are starting to sweat. Rome didn't just chase off the pirates, they stayed. Left governors behind, gave orders, drew maps. That's not rescue behaviour, that's starter pack empire stuff. Rome's real goal wasn't Illyria, though. That was just the front porch. What they really wanted was a reason to walk into the house, into Greece itself. And thanks to a mix of Greek paranoia, Macedonian ego, and the world's worst alliance building, they got it. Enter Philip V of Macedon again. He's still young, still ambitious, and now watching Rome's growing influence with the same expression you'd use if someone started eating off your plate without asking. He wants to keep Greece under his thumb and maybe even rebuild some of Alexander's old dream. But dreams are expensive and neighbours are annoying. So he does what many insecure kings do, he pokes the bear. Philip starts forming sketchy alliances. He cozies up to the Seleucid Empire in the east, another major Hellenistic power that's also not too fond of Rome. Together, they decide to divide the eastern Mediterranean like it's a pizza at a college party. Rome, still licking its wounds from the Second Punic War, sees this as a threat. And Rome doesn't ignore threats. Rome sends legions. This sparks the Second Illyrian War, which is technically a footnote but important for one reason. It shows that Rome is no longer willing to let anything slide in the Eastern Adriatic. They are laying the groundwork one province at a time, and while they're there, they start receiving ambassadors from various Greek cities complaining about Philip. Apparently, he's being rude, blocking trade routes, invading islands, bullying neighbours, the usual king stuff. Rome now has the perfect excuse to escalate things with Macedon. It's called the Second Macedonian War, and it's where the gloves come off. By 200 BCE, Rome marches across the Adriatic with purpose. This isn't just a show of force, this is a military campaign. They ally with the Aetolian League, because of course the Aetolians are involved, Pergamon in Asia Minor, and various Greek city-states who'd rather kneel to Rome than be squeezed by Philip. It's a weird coalition. Mountain folk, coastal merchants, eastern kings, and the Roman war machine, all united by a shared dislike of Macedon. One of the key moments in this campaign comes in 197 BCE at the Battle of Cynoscephalae, which, for the record, means dogs' heads. Nobody knows why. Ancient battlefield names are always a little unhinged. There, Roman legions face off against Philip's phalanx, the traditional Macedonian battle formation. It's rows and rows of spear-wielding soldiers packed so tight they look like a human porcupine. But here's the twist. The Roman legion isn't afraid of porcupines. It's flexible, mobile, and, unlike the phalanx, can handle rough terrain. During the battle, fog rolls in, formations split, and at just the right moment, Roman commanders exploit a gap in the Macedonian line. The phalanx breaks. Macedonian soldiers panic. The Roman legions close in like a trap snapping shut. Philip is defeated. Hard. The war ends soon after, and Rome imposes peace terms that essentially kneecap Macedon's military ambitions. But Rome doesn't stick around. That's the weird part. They claim they're not here to stay. Instead, in a bizarre public relations moment, a Roman general named Titus Quinctius Flamininus stands in front of a crowd of Greeks and announces, "You are free." Imagine it. You're standing in the stadium at the Isthmian Games. The sun's blazing, the crowd buzzing, and here's this Roman in a red-trimmed toga declaring freedom for Greece like he's handing out party favours. The Greeks go wild. Cheers echo across the Aegean. People cry, statues are built, songs are sung. It's the emotional equivalent of Rome throwing a surprise party for someone they secretly plan to evict later. Now, scholars still argue about whether Flamininus meant it or not. Was Rome genuinely trying to leave Greece independent? Or was this just another clever strategy? Pull out temporarily to look benevolent, then slide back in when everyone's distracted. But for now, the illusion works. Greece believes it's been liberated. Rome goes home. And yet, not really. Roman diplomats stay behind. Advisors start showing up in city councils. Greek kings still need Roman approval to do anything larger than sneeze. It's like breaking up with someone but continuing to live in their guest room and borrow their sandals. Back in Macedon, Philip keeps his throne but knows his days of greatness are over. He's forced to disband parts of his army, pay a fine, and keep a tight leash on his ambitions. Meanwhile, the rest of Greece enjoys a brief period of what could generously be called peace, but more accurately feels like the calm before a bigger, louder storm. And you, if you're paying attention, can sense it. Rome isn't gone. They're just waiting, watching, sitting back while the Greeks celebrate their freedom. The same kind of freedom you give a puppy when you still have the leash in your hand. So here you are again, standing in the heat of a Greek summer, watching the paint peel on a faded statue of Athena, while everyone around you pretends things are finally turning around. Macedon's been tamed, Rome's gone back to Italy, and the streets of Corinth are buzzing with optimism. The philosophers are back in the agora, the merchants are hawking their wine-dark olives, and children are running barefoot through temple courtyards like something out of a hopeful fresco. But under the surface, yeah, things are quietly, efficiently unravelling. Again. Philip V of Macedon isn't the kind of guy who takes humiliation well. Sure, he made a big show of accepting the terms after the Battle of Cynoscephalae, smiled through gritted teeth at Roman envoys, and nodded politely at their long list of restrictions. But inside, he's already planning his comeback. Macedon might be down, but it's not out. He starts rebuilding his finances, reorganising what little army he's allowed to keep, and raising his two sons, Perseus and Demetrius, in a toxic stew of ambition and paranoia. Classic royal parenting. Meanwhile, the so-called freedom that Flamininus declared for the Greeks is starting to feel conditional. Rome didn't occupy cities with troops, sure, but their influence never really left. Every time a Greek city has an argument, and they always have arguments, it's Rome they turn to. Please mediate this dispute. Please tell our neighbours to stop raiding our farms. Please remind Sparta that it's not 400 BC anymore. Rome becomes the referee in a never-ending Greek game of political dodgeball. And the Greeks, perhaps without realising it, give away more and more power just by asking Rome to solve their problems. It gets worse. The various Greek leagues, especially the Aetolian League, keep playing a dangerous game of brinkmanship. The Aetolians, who somehow still think they're the cleverest people in the Mediterranean, decide it's time to tip the scales back in their favour. So they do something extraordinarily dumb. They invite a foreign king, Antiochus III of the Seleucid Empire, to liberate Greece from Roman influence. That's right, another king, another liberation. You'd think they'd learn. Antiochus III is no small fry. He rules an empire stretching from modern-day Turkey to Iran, and he's been looking for an excuse to push west. So when the Aetolians ring him up like an X at 2 a.m, he shows up with ships, elephants, and a whole lot of hubris. The year is 92 BCE, and the Roman Senate is not amused. Enter the Roman Seleucid War, or as Rome likely saw it, oh great, now we have to fight the East too. But Rome isn't caught off guard, they're annoyed but ready. They send their legions back across the Adriatic, this time with less patience and more siege equipment. Antiochus makes a few dramatic moves, captures a few towns, and even gets crowned as a liberator in some places. But then reality smacks him in the face at the Battle of Magnesia in 190 BCE. Imagine this. Antiochus lines up his troops with war elephants, cataphracts, archers, and flashy eastern cavalry. Across the field, the Romans are quiet, disciplined, wearing those grim bronze helmets like they are just here to do paperwork. The battle isn't even close. Rome demolishes Antiochus's forces, sends him limping back to Asia, and imposes a peace so brutal that Antiochus ends up paying an enormous indemnity and handing over his youngest son, future troublemaker Antiochus IV Epiphanes, as a hostage. That's not diplomacy, that's a checkmate with extra humiliation. Now Rome is no longer pretending to be just a helpful ally in the region. They've humiliated two major kings, Philip of Macedon and Antiochus of the Seleucid Empire, in less than a decade. Greek city-states start to realise that inviting Rome in wasn't a temporary arrangement. It was a one-way door. And worse, they're stuck playing host while Rome rearranges the furniture. A quirky detail from this time, Roman soldiers in Greece begin sending letters home describing the food, the women, the culture, and, predictably, the baths. Greek baths apparently are amazing. More advanced, more elegant, and with better gossip. Some Roman officers even start copying Greek fashion and philosophy. which leads to a weird cultural moment where Greeks are losing their independence while Roman generals are quoting Plato at dinner parties like newly converted fanboys. And in Macedon, the plot thickens. Philip V is growing more bitter by the year. He doesn't trust anyone, least of all his two sons. The elder, Perseus, is ambitious and calculating. The younger, Demetrius, has spent time as a hostage in Rome and come back with Roman friends, Roman manners, and just enough charm to make Philip suspicious. Whispers start spreading. Is Demetrius too close to the Romans? Is he being groomed as a puppet king? It all goes sideways in a royal mess worthy of a tragic play. Philip, convinced that Demetrius is plotting against him with Roman backing, has his own son executed. Just sits there and signs the order like he's approving a building permit. Later, Philip dies, bitter, broken and surrounded by regrets. Perseus takes the throne, a man shaped by betrayal and shadows. He doesn't trust the Romans, he doesn't trust anyone, and he's ready to fight. Now, scholars debate whether Perseus actually wanted to restore Macedon's power, or just wanted to survive Rome's tightening grip. Some argue he was a cautious, defensive ruler pushed too far. Others say he was just another arrogant monarch who thought he could outmaneuver Rome with clever diplomacy. Well, either way, tensions are rising, and the pieces are sliding into place for the next big confrontation. The thing is, you can feel it coming. The mood across Greece is heavy again. The alliances are shifting, the ambassadors are whispering in back rooms, the Roman legates are arriving with bigger entourages and fewer smiles, and in the hills of Macedon, Perseus is sharpening spears. Rome hasn't declared war yet, but they're watching, waiting, and if history's any guide, it's only a matter of time before legions are marching again. This time not to free Greece, but to bury the last of its independence under sandaled feet. By the time you hear the first rumours of war again, it's less a shock and more a tired sigh. Greece has seen enough banners and bronze to know what's coming. People still go through the motions, harvest festivals, sacrifices at the temples, agonising debates in city assemblies. But underneath all of it, there's this gnawing understanding. Peace never lasts long here. Especially not with Rome watching from across the sea and a freshly crowned King Perseus of Macedon, testing how far he can stretch the leash. Perseus is not his father, Philip V. Where Philip was hot-headed and dramatic, Perseus is colder. More calculating. If Philip ruled with ambition and wine-fueled speeches, Perseus rules with suspicion and spreadsheets. Figuratively, of course, but you get the idea. He wants to restore Macedon's strength, but he's smart enough to know that charging at Rome with a sword drawn is suicide. So instead he starts slowly, almost quietly here. He strengthens alliances, collects taxes more aggressively, invests in his army, and does his best to present himself not as a threat, but as a respected player in the Eastern Mediterranean. And at first it sort of works. Some Greek city-states, especially those in Thessaly and Epirus, start warming up to Perseus. He doesn't look like a conqueror, he looks like a stabiliser. And in a region where half the population is just tired of unpredictable Roman interventions, that's appealing. Even a few kings and city leaders in Asia Minor start cozying up to him, not openly, but enough to make the Roman Senate take notice. Now, Rome has spies everywhere. Ambassadors, merchants, friends of the Republic. They're all feeding information back to the Senate like an ancient version of a Reddit thread with too much power. And what they're hearing is making the old men in togas deeply uncomfortable. Perseus is growing popular, he's marrying into the right families, he's holding diplomatic meetings, he's making everyone feel like Macedon might matter again. That's a problem, because Rome isn't in the business of letting former enemies make comebacks. Once you've been knocked down, you're expected to stay there. Politely, quietly, and preferably with tributes of gold and marble every few years. So the Romans start looking for an excuse, not a big one, just enough to justify war. And wouldn't you know it, one of their minor allies in the region, a kingdom so small you probably couldn't find it on a map if you tried, complains that Perseus is interfering. That's it. That's the spark. The Senate votes, the legions are summoned, and just like that, see, the Third Macedonian War begins. You might think the Greeks would unite, or at least panic, but most of them are just exhausted. They've seen this movie before. Some cities throw in their lot with Rome immediately, hoping to be on the winning side. Others hedge their bets, staying neutral while secretly watching how things play out. A few bold or foolish ones, especially in central Greece, start hoping Perseus might actually have a chance. And then there are the real gamblers, those who believe that this war, finally, could tip the scales back in Greece's favour. Perseus, for his part, is ready. He's spent years building a treasury, training troops and shoring up defences. He's no military genius, but he's competent, cautious and surprisingly effective at first. His early campaigns are more like fencing than warfare. He pokes feints, avoids full engagements and harasses Roman supply lines. He even wins a few small battles, enough that people start whispering, maybe he can pull this off, but Rome doesn't send its second stringers to this one. After a few underwhelming generals fumble their way through the early phases of the war, the Senate gets serious. They hand the campaign to Lucius Aemilius Paulus, a grizzled, no-nonsense veteran who knows exactly how to end a war, and how to make a point while doing it. Paulus arrives, surveys the situation, and begins moving his legions like pieces on a game board. Slowly, methodically, he begins backing Perseus into a corner. The decisive moment comes in 168 BCE at the Battle of Pydna, and if you're standing on that dusty field the morning of the fight, it probably looks like two giant iron jaws closing in on each other. On one side, the Macedonian phalanx, still disciplined, still proud, with rows of gleaming sarissas stretching out like an ocean of spears. On the other, the Roman legions, veterans in red cloaks, shields held tight, short swords gleaming under the sun. The battle begins with formation, then slips into chaos. The terrain is uneven, hilly, broken, nothing ideal for a phalanx that relies on level ground and tight ranks. At first, the Macedonians hold. They push forward, and Roman lines bend. But then the line breaks, not the Romans, but the phalanx itself. Gaps form. Paulus sees it immediately. He sends in his infantry, not in blocks, but in small mobile groups. They slip through the cracks and start cutting the phalanx apart from the inside. It's brutal, efficient, final. By sunset, the field is quiet except for the buzz of flies and the low moan of the wounded. Thousands of Macedonians lie dead. Perseus flees, abandoning his army, his cause, and ultimately his dignity. He's captured shortly afterward and marched back to Rome, not as a guest but as a trophy. In one of history's more uncomfortable PR stunts, Perseus is paraded through the streets during Paulus's triumph, a grand procession celebrating the victory. Roman citizens cheer, throw flowers and line the roads, watching as the last true king of Macedon walks in chains behind a war chariot. Afterward, he's tossed into a dark prison cell, left to rot until his eventual death. No dramatic exit, no noble ending, just obscurity. With Perseus gone, Rome doesn't bother with subtlety anymore. Macedon is dismantled, literally. The kingdom is split into 4 republics, each isolated from the others, with heavy taxes and Roman-approved governors. The goal isn't just control, it's humiliation. Rome wants to make sure no one in Greece forgets who's boss. A strange little historical detail. After the war, Paulus, feeling both triumphant and maybe a little bored, takes a tour of Greece's cultural hotspots. He visits Delphi, checks out statues in Thebes, even listens to philosophers in Athens. Some accounts say he was genuinely awed by Greek culture. Others suggest he was just shopping for trophies to ship back home. Either way, statues start disappearing from temples, books from libraries. Greece is being conquered not just militarily, but intellectually. Scholars still argue whether the Battle of Pydna was the end of free Greece. Some say yes, it was the final nail. Others argue that Greece had already lost its freedom years before, the moment it started depending on Rome to solve its internal messes. Either way, the stage is set. Macedon is crushed, the legions are staying, and a storm is quietly building further south, where cities like Corinth and Athens are still whispering about rebellion, even as Roman statues rise in their town squares. You'd think that after the crushing finality of Pydna, the Greeks would get the message, Rome doesn't just win wars, it ends eras. But no, the dust hasn't even settled on Perseus's discarded crown before the next wave of Greek drama begins. Because this is Greece, and if there's one thing Greece does better than statues and sandals, it's dragging internal squabbles into international disasters. It's now the late 160s BCE. Rome has dismantled Macedon into 4 puppet republics, each one carefully isolated to make sure no one gets too ambitious again. Communication between them is forbidden. Intermarriage? Illegal. Trading? Sure. But only under supervision. It's less divide and conquer, and more divide and watch you awkwardly bump into each other at festivals without making eye contact. And while the Romans don't station full-time garrisons in every Greek city just yet, their presence is felt. Like that one neighbour who's always peeking through the curtains. Now here's where things get extra Greek. Remember the Achaean League? It's this confederation of city-states down in the Peloponnese. Corinth, Argos, Patras and others, originally formed for mutual defence. At its height it was something like an ancient co-op, but with more sandals and far more betrayal. After Rome's victory at Pydna, the Achaean League starts acting strangely. On paper, they're grateful to Rome. They praise the Republic in public forums, they send congratulatory embassies, they even mint coins honouring Roman victories. But behind closed doors, they're furious. See, the Achaeans had expected a reward for staying neutral during the Macedonian conflict. They had assumed Rome would pat them on the head and give them more influence in the region. Maybe even a few new cities to manage. Instead, they get sidelined. Worse, Rome starts making demands, territorial adjustments, tribute payments, and a growing list of suggestions that sound less like advice and more like ultimatums. The Achaeans feel insulted, and when Greeks feel insulted, things get dramatic. One city in particular becomes a flashpoint: Sparta. Yes, that's Sparta, the one with the 300, and all the grit and muscle. By this time it's a shadow of its former self, but it still knows how to cause trouble. It's technically part of the Achaean League, but barely. The Spartans hate being bossed around by Corinth and its allies, and they really hate being told what to do by Rome, so they start fighting with the League again, appealing directly to Rome for protection. The Romans, being very Roman about things, meddle just enough to make everyone angry and confused. Soon a full diplomatic meltdown erupts. Rome sends an embassy to straighten things out, and this is where the story takes a weird turn. The Romans don't just scold the Achaeans, they humiliate them. They accuse the League of defying Roman interests, of mistreating pro-Roman citizens, of being ungrateful. As punishment, Rome demands that over 1,000 prominent Achaean citizens be sent to Italy, not as slaves or prisoners exactly, but as guests under surveillance. Among them is the historian Polybius, whose future writings will give us a front-row seat to everything unravelling now. These Achaeans are held in Italy for years, some for decades. No trials, no formal charges, just endless waiting. Rome has weaponized bureaucracy and it's brutal. Meanwhile, back home, resentment festers. Every action Rome takes is seen as overreach. Every law passed by the League is viewed as a test of loyalty, and eventually someone breaks. It's now 149 BCE, and Macedon, which had been lying dormant under Roman watch, suddenly twitches. A man calling himself Philip VI claims to be the son of Perseus and sparks a rebellion. It's small, sloppy, and doomed, but it's just enough to convince Rome that the region still isn't settled. The legions return and the rebellion is crushed like a fly under a sandal, but it leaves Rome twitchy. Their patience is wearing thin, especially with the south. So when the Achaean League starts making noise again, defying Rome's requests threatening Sparta, accusing Roman sympathisers of treason, the Senate has had enough. They send another embassy, the tone this time? Not friendly. The Romans demand that certain cities, including Sparta, be removed from the League entirely. The Achaeans respond the way you'd expect from a proud, insulted people with a long memory and poor impulse control. They declare war. Yes, war. Against Rome. It's a bold move, or a suicidal one, depending on how much wine you've had before breakfast. In 146 BCE, Roman General Lucius Mummius leads an army into the Peloponnese. And this isn't a policing operation. This is total war. City after city falls, and the Roman advance is ruthless, deliberate, and without the usual PR spin. No speeches about liberation, no promises of freedom, just destruction. Then comes Corinth, rich, beautiful, famous for its bronze work and philosophy, one of the jewels of the Greek world. The Achaeans make their last stand here. Mummius doesn't negotiate, he attacks. The Battle of Corinth is swift and devastating. The Roman legions outmatch the desperate Greek forces in every way. Training, discipline, equipment. Within hours, the city walls are breached. What follows is nothing short of a cultural execution. The Romans burn Corinth to the ground, statues are looted, art is shipped back to Rome. Citizens are slaughtered or enslaved, temples are desecrated. It's not just about winning, it's about making a point. That point being, do not mess with Rome. Corinth is left a smoking ruin. And the message echoes across the Greek world like a funeral bell. Every city, every temple, every philosopher now knows this isn't a partnership anymore. This is occupation. Rome dissolves the Achaean League entirely. The Peloponnese is reorganised under Roman oversight, with loyal cities rewarded and defiant ones punished. Sparta, ironically, is allowed a bit of autonomy, mostly because it was too weak to be a threat and too proud to admit defeat. But real power now rests with Roman governors, tax collectors, and legions stationed strategically to keep the peace, and in Rome, Corinth's destruction is treated as a triumph. Mummius returns to a hero's welcome. He parades Greek treasures through the streets, statues, paintings, golden pawn armour. It's a victory not just over a city, but over an entire idea, the idea that Greece could still stand on its own. Historians still debate whether the war with the Achaeans was avoidable. Some blame the arrogance of the League's leadership. Others argue that Rome wanted a war, needed a reason to take full control. What's certain is that after Corinth, no one in the Greek world believes in their independence anymore. They may still speak Greek, build temples and stage tragedies, but the politics, the power, that belongs to Rome now. The smoke from Corinth's ruins hangs in the air for weeks. If you were anywhere within 50 miles of the city after its destruction in 146 BCE, you'd have smelled it. Burnt marble, charred wood, and something more haunting, the scent of a world ending. Not in some explosive, cataclysmic way. No god splitting the sky. No monsters crawling from the sea. Just the quiet, blackened silence of a civilization realizing its time is up. The city, once a glittering hub of commerce, art, and philosophy, is now a warning. Rome doesn't just conquer anymore, it punishes. And the Greek world, watching Corinth's rubble cool under the sun, finally understands that Rome's game is no longer negotiation. It's dominance, the kind that doesn't leave room for bargaining or misplaced pride. You might think this would trigger total submission across Greece, that city-states would drop their arms, swear loyalty and never grumble again. But this is still Greece, and Greeks don't know how to shut up. Even as the ashes settle, debates start up again in local councils. Some argue Rome had no right to burn Corinth, others insist the Achaeans brought it on themselves. A few, ever the optimists, suggest maybe Rome just needs better communication strategies. Yeah, good luck with that. Meanwhile, Rome begins its cleanup, not just physical, though Corinth does remain a ghost town for over a century, but administrative. The Achaean League is officially dissolved. The Greek mainland, particularly the Peloponnese, is restructured into the Roman province of Achaea. That name, not a compliment. It's Rome's way of saying, we'll keep your title, but we'll be managing things from now on. Achaea is governed by a Roman proconsul, a man with more power than any local leader could ever hope for. He oversees taxes, justice, infrastructure, and, most importantly, loyalty. And every temple festival, every city council meeting, every shipment of olive oil is now under Roman eyes, and the eyes are everywhere. It's not an iron-fisted dictatorship, at least not yet, but it's clear who's in charge. Roman law, Roman roads, Roman coinage, the empire has moved in, and it's redecorating. Some cities fare better than others. Athens, for example, manages to keep a degree of autonomy. The Romans are weirdly soft on Athens, partly because of its cultural prestige, and partly because elite Romans love to name-drop Plato at dinner parties. So they let Athens keep its schools and its local council. But let's be clear, it's autonomy with an asterisk. If Athens ever steps out of line, they know a legion is just a few days' march away. And then there's Delphi. Once a sacred centre where people from all over the ancient world came to ask the oracle about love, war, and the meaning of life. Now, it mostly serves as a tourist attraction for wealthy Romans. They come in droves, senators, generals, even the poets, treating Greek religious sites like cultural museums rather than living temples. They toss a few coins in the donation box, nod sagely at the statues, and then head back to their villas with a souvenir vase and a vague feeling of superiority. A quirky detail from this period? Roman aristocrats begin commissioning busts of themselves in the Greek style. We're talking curly beards, deep foreheads, and that classic philosopher in pain expression. Some even start hiring Greek tutors for their sons. You'd think this was cultural respect, but really it's absorption. Rome isn't trying to erase Greece, it's trying to own it, intellectually, artistically, spiritually. But even with that, not all is calm. There are still flickers of resistance. In the remote corners of Epirus, Thessaly and Crete, bandit kings and rebel groups keep the Roman governors busy. The Spartans, of course, grumble loudly about everything, even though they've been politically irrelevant for over a century. Occasionally, a philosopher will stand up in a forum and speak about the loss of freedom and the death of the polis, but no one really listens. People have taxes to pay, roads to build, and mouths to feed, and Rome, for all its arrogance, is very good at building. Now here's where it gets weird. As Greece sinks further into Roman control, Roman identity itself starts to shift. Young Roman nobles begin modelling themselves after Greek heroes. Achilles, Odysseus, even Socrates. They study in Athens, they wear Greek robes at home, they quote Euripides like it's trendy. One particularly obsessive Roman senator even builds a replica of a Greek temple in his backyard. Greek culture becomes fashionable in Rome, almost essential. This leads some scholars to debate, was Greece truly conquered, or did it win in a different way? Militarily, yes, Rome smashed it. Politically, it was carved up, regulated and swallowed whole, but culturally, Greece starts rewriting Rome from the inside. Art, literature, architecture, religion, it all gets Greco-ified. Rome may have taken Greek land, but Greece colonised Roman identity. And what about the everyday Greeks in this new order? Well, you're one of them. Maybe you're a craftsman in Argos, a farmer in Arcadia, or a schoolteacher in Delphi. Life under Rome isn't terrible, honestly. The roads are better, trade is more stable, piracy has dropped. Sure, you're paying taxes to men with Latin names, but they mostly leave you alone if you don't cause trouble. Your city still holds festivals. The temples haven't been flattened. Your kids are learning to read Homer and Virgil, but you feel it, don't you? That shift, that ache. Your grandparents told stories of hoplites, of leagues and wars for freedom. Now it's all treaties and grain shipments. The past isn't just gone, it's been paved over. A fringe theory pops up among a few aging philosophers that maybe Greece's downfall wasn't Rome, but itself. That too many years of infighting, ego-driven alliances, and stubborn pride cracked the foundations long before Roman boots ever stepped onto Greek soil. That the Greeks opened the door and Rome just happened to be standing there with a ledger and a sword. Whatever the case, the reality now is fixed. Rome is the sea in which you swim, and like the sea it can lift you gently, or drown you without a second thought. But somewhere, maybe in a quiet courtyard in Athens or among the ruins of Corinth, you can still hear the faint whisper of what was, of an old world, not dead exactly, just translated into Latin. The years after Corinth's fall are quiet, at least on the surface. Rome has what it wants now, the troublesome leagues are broken, Macedon is chopped into pieces, and any hope for a unified Greek resistance has been reduced to a memory. Across the Aegean, Roman officials are settling into their new roles like landlords arriving at an inherited estate. Some are competent, some are corrupt. All of them are foreign. The cities of Greece now function less like proud, independent states and more like well-decorated outposts of Roman authority. But life, as always, keeps moving. You wake up in a city like Athens, and it still feels familiar. The columns still catch the morning sun just right. The amphorae still line the marketplace, painted with gods and battles and centaurs mid-dramatic gesture. The philosophers are still out there, robes flapping in the wind, trying to explain why the world exists or why your neighbour refuses to return borrowed wine jugs. But behind all this, there's a subtle tension, like a theatre troupe still performing after the audience has left. Rome, ever the collector of other people's best ideas, begins treating Greece like a cultural gold mine. Statues, manuscripts and scholars are ferried back to Italy. Temples are looted politely, some under the pretense of gifts and exchanges, others just carted off like war trophies with decent lighting. A Roman general walks into a sanctuary in Thebes and says, "This would look great in my atrium," and off it goes. Back in Rome, Greek marble busts now sit in courtyards beside imported peacocks and fig trees. This isn't theft in the brutal smash-and-grab sense, it's more insidious. It's like being hollowed out from within. The Greeks, once the teachers of the world, are now being repackaged as quaint relics, their wisdom displayed behind polished glass. Rome doesn't just want Greek land, it wants Greek legacy, and it wants to wear it like a tailored toga. You start to see the signs everywhere. Latin creeps into public notices. Local assemblies are forced to accept Roman oversight. New magistrates are appointed with Roman backing, often men with dual loyalties or debts to powerful Roman families. Taxes are collected more efficiently, but the proceeds vanish into Roman accounts. Even city defences are inspected, not because anyone expects an invasion, but to make sure the locals don't try anything clever. Still, there's a sense of adjustment. Resistance is mostly gone, reduced to grumbling in private homes or vague complaints at symposiums. Many Greeks try to adapt. Wealthy families marry into Roman households. Greek architects take commissions in Italy. Theatres once used for political speeches now host comedies about Roman governors with bad accents. It's not collaboration exactly, more like reluctant coexistence. You do what you must to survive. Meanwhile, the intellectual world doesn't stop. If anything, Greek scholars find new audiences among Roman elites. The old philosophical schools, Platonists, Stoics, Epicureans, all start gaining Roman pupils. These young aristocrats born into power now want depth. They want meaning. So they travel east, sit in candlelit rooms in Athens, and ask old Greek men to explain the universe. It's flattering in a way, being needed again, but also sad. The teacher still speaks, but the student now owns the house. And here's a little oddity. Many Greek scholars are now technically slaves or freedmen, captured during wars or purchased by Roman nobles. They live in Rome, teaching Greek culture to the very people who destroyed their homeland's independence. Imagine explaining Aristotle to the grandson of the man who torched your city. That's the level of irony we're dealing with. Still, some of these scholars gain real influence. They educate senators' sons, advise generals, even ghostwrite political speeches. Greek thought starts seeping into Roman law, Roman religion, Roman identity. You look at the Roman gods and suddenly they've got Greek names and backstories. Jupiter is just Zeus with a new PR team. Venus is Aphrodite, but now with sponsorships. This slow blending of cultures becomes so complete that future Romans begin claiming Greek ancestry. We're descended from Troy, they insist, pointing to the myth of Aeneas. It's a neat trick. Invade a place, absorb its culture, and then rewrite history so you are always related. A little bit of conquest, a little bit of cosplay. Back in Greece, though, not everyone is thriving. The countryside suffers, farms are overtaxed, local economies collapse under Roman commercial pressure. Merchants who once traded with neighbours now have to deal with Roman tariffs and shifting markets. Coastal cities get sucked into broader imperial logistics, shipping grain, wine or marble not for local wealth, but for Roman demand. And if a famine strikes, don't expect help. Rome protects its own first. One of the more subtle changes is architectural. The classic Greek city layout, the open agora, the sacred temples, the gymnasium starts to warp. Roman baths are added. Amphitheatres crop up in places where Greeks once debated law and virtue. Arches begin to appear, triumphal and heavier, carved with scenes of Roman victories, often over Greeks. You walk through a city like Delphi now and you see two histories rubbing shoulders. One proud but fading, one loud, new, and immovable. And yet, in quiet corners, the old spirit lingers. At night, in shaded courtyards, a small group might still gather to recite Homer, not for show but for memory. In the hills, old families tell children stories of Marathon and Salamis, not as national pride anymore, but like bedtime tales of wild glory. It's not resistance. Not really. It's mourning. Some historians argue that this period marked the final Hellenistic gasp, a time when Greek influence spread again, not through conquest but through osmosis. Rome absorbed Greece so completely that the two became indistinguishable in some areas. Others see it as a slow erosion, a hollowing. A vibrant culture reduced to decoration in someone else's villa. So you sit there now in a square that once held speeches about liberty, and you watch a Roman magistrate approve building permits for a new bathhouse. The sun glints off his bronze breastplate. The crowd nods and cheers, because that's what they're supposed to do. But you remember when this square was yours, when the decisions made here echoed across the world. Now they echo across columns dressed in ivy, half of them shipped in from Rome. Greece isn't dead, but it's been repurposed. By now, you've probably adjusted. You don't flinch anymore when Roman officials march through town. The sound of Latin doesn't jar you quite like it used to, even if the accent still grates. The temples are quieter, the assemblies shorter, and the festivals less political. Everything in Greece has started to blur, as if the past was a loud, colourful painting slowly being washed over in dull beige. But underneath it all, the Greeks are still there, living, breathing, adapting. They always do. The strange thing is, Rome doesn't just tolerate Greek culture, it practically worships it. Roman elites now decorate their villas with Greek mosaics, line their libraries with Greek scrolls, and give their children names like Hector and Dionysius, because it sounds cultured. In public, they might posture with their Roman gravitas, all about discipline and honour and civic duty. But in private, they're soaking in Greek philosophy like bathwater. It's not just art and books either. Roman religion begins bending to fit Greek shapes. Old Latin gods are now paired with Greek equivalents. Their mythologies blended like an awkward fan-fiction crossover. Saturn becomes Kronos, Mars becomes Ares, but more marketable, and Juno starts borrowing Hera's drama. Greek myths are repackaged in Roman plays, Roman temples, and Roman coins. And if you squint, it starts to feel like Rome isn't so much replacing Greece as building itself with Greek blueprints, one column at a time. Still, this cultural embrace doesn't change the political reality. Greece is under Rome, fully. The polite fiction of autonomy is long gone. After Corinth's destruction and the establishment of Achaia as a Roman province, all major decisions are made by Roman officials, governors, proconsuls, tax collectors. If you're a Greek magistrate now, your job is less about governing and more about managing the expectations of your Roman superiors. Step out of line, and your city might accidentally lose its tax privileges or see its port rerouted. Rome doesn't need to station troops in every Greek city. They rule through fear and paperwork. The message is clear: obey, and you can keep your statues. Resist, and you'll be dust. But here's something strange. Despite all this, the Romans themselves are growing more and more obsessed with the idea of Greece. Not the real Greece, the fractured, politically neutered landscape they actually control, but an imaginary Greece. The idealized past. A place of heroism, intellect, and eternal wisdom. In Roman poetry and politics, Greece becomes a metaphor. It's the noble ancestor, the wise grandfather, the poetic soul behind the Roman sword. Roman generals quote Greek philosophers in the Senate. Young aristocrats travel east for their version of a study abroad program, wandering through ruined temples and scribbling down verses of Homer while pretending they're finding themselves. And back home, Roman homes start mimicking Greek architecture more than ever. Columns, courtyards, friezes, everything gets a little more marble, a little more myth. You, of course, see through it. You're Greek. You know how hollow this performance is. Rome may love the idea of Greece, but they don't understand the weight of what they've taken. They don't see the irony of praising Socrates while crushing the kind of free thought he stood for. They don't grasp the sadness of lecturing about democracy while sending soldiers to silence dissenting voices in Athenian forums. In the countryside, the effects of Roman rule grow harder to ignore. Agriculture is reorganized for export. Grain and wine flow toward Italy, while local farmers struggle with debt. Roman landowners, many of whom never even visit Greece, begin buying up vast tracts of farmland, forcing Greek tenants into labour or off their land entirely. The old world of small independent farms begins to vanish, replaced by sprawling estates controlled from across the sea. In cities, Roman merchants set up shop, often pushing out local artisans. It's not a hostile takeover, just slow economic pressure. Roman coins flood the market. Latin inscriptions appear above Greek ones. Even time itself begins to feel Roman, measured by Roman calendars, Roman tax deadlines, Roman festivals. Every year, it feels like a little more of Greece disappears, not dramatically, but gradually, like sand slipping through fingers. But there's something else happening too, something more subtle. A hybrid identity begins to form. You see it in the children who grow up speaking both Greek and Latin, in the temples that blend Roman engineering with Greek aesthetics, in the political speeches that quote Plato and Cicero. This isn't just occupation anymore, it's transformation. Greece isn't just being ruled, it's being absorbed, stitched into the Roman world so completely that the seams start to disappear. Some Greeks find opportunity in this. They rise through Roman ranks, serve in administrative roles, even earn citizenship, something once unimaginable. A few become senators, one or two even advise emperors. These are the success stories, held up as proof that Greece still matters. That greatness can be reborn under new rulers, and yet not everyone's convinced. In darkened symposiums, older men still complain about the loss of true Greece. They talk about the old days before Rome, when cities ruled themselves and heroes walked the land. They shake their heads at young Greeks who dress in Roman tunics and joke in Latin. They don't even know who they are, they mutter. Just little Romans in sandals. But the world doesn't slow down for nostalgia. Rome marches on. The Republic, stretched thin by its vast conquests, will soon become something else entirely. A full-blown empire, ruled not by senators but by emperors. and Greece, already woven into the Roman fabric, will become more valuable than ever, not as a political force, but as a cultural jewel in the imperial crown. So you stand there now, maybe at the edge of a Roman-built forum in a once-proud Greek city. You listen to the speeches, half in Greek, half in Latin. You watch traders haggle in a mix of dialects. You see statues of old Greek heroes standing beside new ones of Roman emperors, both weathered by time, both missing a nose or two. And for a moment, it's hard to tell where Greece ends and Rome begins. If there's one thing Rome excels at, besides quarrying, taxing, and naming everything after itself, it's slowly making you forget what life was like before it arrived. Not because it erases the past, but because it replaces it with something that feels permanent. You look around now, maybe standing beneath the worn archway of a once sacred temple, and everything feels Roman. Not in a loud trumpets and triumphs kind of way, but in the way the bricks are laid, the way the city smells, the way the law scrolls are written. Even the shadows seem Roman now. This is the point where most resistance has melted into routine. Greece isn't fighting anymore, not seriously. The rebellions are done, the speeches silenced. What's left is a kind of cultural resignation, a slow exhale that seems to say, well, this is how things are now. And yet, weirdly, it's also the beginning of something else, because now the Romans start doing something unexpected. They start calling Greek cities their friends. Not conquered territories, not client states, but allies. The Roman Republic, or rather, the very serious men in the Senate, begins officially recognizing cities like Athens, Rhodes and Delphi as societes liberae eis foederatae, free and federated allies. It's not full independence, more like honorary status, kind of like giving someone a VIP pass to a party they're not allowed to leave. Why do they do this? Well, partly for appearances. Rome wants to seem benevolent, a liberator, not a colonizer. It also helps keep the peace. If a city believes it still holds some ancient honour, it's less likely to riot when the tax collectors show up. And so in public, these cities parade around their freedom, hosting festivals, issuing their own coins, with Caesar's face on them naturally, and pretending the last 2 centuries didn't happen. It's theatre, political cosplay. But it works. Athens benefits the most from this arrangement. The Romans can't get enough of it. The city becomes a cultural Disneyland for Roman elites. Senators and wealthy aristocrats send their sons there to study rhetoric and philosophy, to sit beneath olive trees and ponder the nature of truth like a bunch of toga-wearing influencers. They take guided tours of Socrates' old haunts. They buy overpriced scrolls. They complain about the heat. Athens becomes less a city and more a finishing school for Rome's upper crust. Some scholars say this is when the Greek world begins to truly shift. Not militarily, that's already done, but psychologically. Because now, instead of being the cultural elder, Greece starts playing the part of the charming relic. A place of nostalgia, a beautiful ruin. The Romans revere Greek wisdom, sure, but in the same way you revere a well-preserved fossil, something you admire, maybe even study, but never really believe can come alive again. Meanwhile, other cities don't get quite as cosy a relationship. Corinth, still a black scar in Greek memory, remains in ruins for decades, a constant reminder of what happens when you push too hard. But even that eventually changes. In 44 BCE, nearly a century after it was torched, Julius Caesar decides to rebuild it. Yes, that Julius Caesar, dictator, reformer, soon to be stabbed. He declares the founding of Colonia Laus Iulia Corinthiensis, a Roman colony built on top of the old city's bones. It's a clever move, strategic too. Corinth was always valuable, geographically, economically, symbolically, and now it rises again. But this time it's Roman to the core. See new grid-patterned streets, Roman villas, Latin signage, and a population mostly made up of veterans and Roman settlers. The old Corinth, with its proud citizens and golden temples, is gone. What remains is a marble-skinned echo, polished and practical, designed to serve the empire. And then there's Delphi, still sacred, still drawing visitors, but not the way it once did. The oracle, once the most feared and respected voice in the Greek world, is now a curiosity. Pilgrims still come, yes, but now they include Roman governors seeking omens about grain prices and career prospects. The god Apollo, once cloaked in mystery, now sits beside statues of Roman emperors, both of them staring blankly across temple courtyards like bored co-workers on break. Delphi gets Roman funding, sure, restoration projects, a few new columns, but it also gets new rules. Roman officials oversee the sanctuary's finances, Priests must now check their appointments with Roman administrators. Even the sacred games are adjusted to align with Roman calendars. It's not desecration, it's micromanagement. In the background of all this, you start to see a growing class of Romanized Greeks, wealthy citizens who wear the right tunics, speak fluent Latin and have friends in the Senate. These are the power brokers now. They sit on local councils, host Roman guests, and act as middlemen between the empire and the population. Some are cynical, others genuinely believe in the new order. But all of them understand one thing: resistance is bad for business. You, if you're an ordinary citizen, probably fall into the pattern too. You pay your taxes, you go to the baths, maybe you send your son to learn Latin, or your daughter to marry into a Romanized family. It's not betrayal, it's just survival. And in time, the lines blur so much that they stop mattering. But there are still echoes of the old world. In island temples far from the mainland, old priests still perform rituals the Romans don't understand. In backrooms of academies, philosophers whisper about freedom ethics and the soul's place in the cosmos. A few even write subversive treatises quietly circulated that question Rome's authority. Not openly, not loudly, but the flame isn't out, just hidden. One fringe belief starts to take hold around this time: that Greek identity is no longer tied to political power, but to intellect. That while Rome may rule the world, Greece rules the mind. This idea gains traction, it spreads, and soon it becomes the secret pride of an otherwise humbled people. They may own our cities, but they still kneel at the altar of our wisdom, so now you sit, perhaps in the shade of a Roman-built column, watching traders shout in both languages, watching boys recite both Homer and Virgil, and you realise this is what survival looks like. It's not always heroic. Often it's quiet, subtle, enduring not through rebellion, but through relevance. Greece has lost the war, but its words, its ideas, its very way of thinking. Those are marching west now, like invisible legions in the minds of men who once only knew the sword. You wake to the sound of sandals on marble, and two merchants arguing in a mix of Greek and Latin over whether someone was cheated out of a bolt of dyed wool. It's a familiar noise now, bilingual shouting, mingled accents, and that particular cadence Romans use when they think they're speaking fluent Greek, but are absolutely not. This is your life in the Roman province of Achaia. Not quite Greek, not fully Roman, a cultural halfway house, but somehow it works, at least for now. We're in the final stretch of the 1st century BCE, and Rome isn't even pretending to be a republic anymore. Julius Caesar has come and gone, dramatically, yes, with knives. Civil war has raged across the Roman world like wildfire through dry olive groves. First Caesar versus Pompey, then Octavian versus Antony. Now, at last, the dust has settled, and the man known as Augustus sits at the top. Not a king officially, just the first citizen, but everyone knows what it means. The Roman Empire is born, and with the empire comes reorganization. Rome begins streamlining its provinces, and Greece gets tucked more tightly under imperial control. No more pretending, no more illusions of freedom or partnership. You're in the empire now, part of it, subject to it, and wrapped in its endless bureaucratic embrace. The province of Achaia is defined and locked in, a governor is assigned. Imperial statues go up in every major square, some with inscriptions in Greek, others in Latin, all bearing the same message: Rome is forever. But here's the weird part: it's not entirely awful. The first few decades of Augustus's rule bring something that Greece hasn't known in generations: stability. Roads are repaired, trade increases, banditry decreases, temples get cleaned up, even piracy in the Aegean, which used to be practically a job description, gets hammered into oblivion by Roman fleets. It's not peace in the classical Greek sense, where autonomy is sacred and each city governs itself. It's peace in the Roman sense, ordered, efficient, heavily taxed, and enforced by men with pointy sticks. And yet, life goes on. In some cities it even flourishes. Athens becomes more important than ever, not politically but intellectually. It is now the place for Roman elites to send their sons to get refined. Picture toga-clad teenagers being shipped off to study Plato and Aristotle, drinking watered-down wine and trying not to fall asleep during ethics lectures. Some of them even come back with a sense of humility, though most just come back with new sandals and an inflated sense of self. Elsewhere, cities like Ephesus, Rhodes and Pergamon, technically not in Greece but still in the Greek-speaking world, become cultural hotspots. They boast libraries, temples and theatres that attract attention across the empire. Tourists, scholars, merchants, they all pass through. Greek is still the language of intellect. Latin might run the empire, but Greek runs the classroom. In fact, Greek becomes something of a second official language in the Eastern Empire. Roman governors in Achaea are expected to know it. Inscriptions are often bilingual, legal proceedings might switch between the two depending on who's in the room. You could argue a case in Latin, get sentenced in Greek, and have your fine calculated by a scribe who can't spell either. This fusion of cultures leads to some interesting quirks. Roman emperors begin embracing Greek traditions, not just as conquerors, but as participants. Augustus styles himself as a patron of the arts and philosophy. He donates to Greek temples. Later emperors go even further. Nero, for example, absolutely loves Greek culture. He performs in Greek theatres, writes Greek poetry badly, and even competes in the Olympic Games, though it's unclear whether anyone dared to beat him. It becomes a kind of imperial hobby, emperors trying to out-Greek the Greeks. Sometimes it's sincere, sometimes it's performative, but either way the message is clear. Greek culture isn't just tolerated, it's trendy. And not just for the elite. Greek music, fashion, even religious rituals seep into Roman cities. Statues of Greek gods stand in Roman homes, mythologies merge, temples are rededicated, and while all of this is happening, a strange role reversal unfolds. Once, Rome was the student and Greece the teacher. Now Rome is the power and Greece the echo. But that echo grows louder with each passing year, shaping the very core of Roman identity. It's not just that the Romans admire Greece, they need it. To be a civilized Roman now is to know Homer. To quote Socrates, to appreciate sculpture that doesn't look like someone carved it with a spoon. But don't confuse this cultural exchange with political freedom. Greece is still a province. Taxes are collected by Roman agents. Legal decisions can be overruled by Roman courts. Cities must request imperial approval for any significant change. Building, festivals, trade laws. Every once in a while a governor gets too greedy, too cruel, and riots break out. The Roman response is always the same, swift, brutal, and thorough. Bellions aren't punished, they're erased. Still, some Greeks find ways to thrive. Merchants benefit from expanded trade routes. Artisans sell their work across the empire. Teachers and tutors are in high demand. A few lucky Greeks even rise to the level of equestrians or gain Roman citizenship, an honour once as rare as rain in Sparta. By this point it's possible, though still difficult, for a Greek to truly make it in the Roman system. Of course, not everyone sees this as progress. In the quiet corners of academies and in the last flickering symposiums, there are still whispers about what Greece used to be. A land of independent city-states, of glory and madness, of Themistocles and Leonidas, of gods who meddled in battles and poets who turned war into song. Now, those stories are history, literally, written down, studied, archived, revered, but no longer lived. One quirky fact that sometimes gets forgotten. During Augustus's reign, some Greek cities tried to flatter the emperor by claiming to be his long-lost relatives. They dug up myths, invented genealogies, and even built shrines to Augustus as if he were descended from Zeus himself. And you know what? He loved it. Rome had brought order, but the Greeks still knew how to flatter. It's a bizarre balance. A subjugated people still shaping the identity of their conquerors. A civilization defeated in war but victorious in memory. Every Roman villa with a Greek fresco, every senator quoting a Greek philosopher. Every Roman boy forced to recite Homer before he can inherit a fortune. It all points to a simple truth. Greece may have lost its independence, but it never lost its influence. So you stand there again, maybe on the edge of a hill looking over a city you barely recognize. Roman tiles on Greek roofs, Latin prayers in temples to Greek gods, a marble bust of Augustus staring down from the Acropolis like he belongs there. You sigh because you know what came before, but maybe, just maybe, you understand what's coming next too. This isn't the end of Greece, it's just a new chapter. It starts tall, a coin here, a statue there, a whispered phrase repeated by a visiting official. Before long, it's everywhere. Rome and her friends. That's what they call the arrangement now. Greece, no longer a conquered land exactly, but a trusted partner, socius ally. The word sounds nice, polite, even flattering. But let's be honest, everyone knows who's driving this cart. By the time Augustus dies in 14 CE and his adopted son Tiberius takes over, the Roman Empire is locked in tight. The Republic is a memory. The Senate is a formality. And Greece? Greece is a treasured possession, like a family heirloom you don't quite understand, but Polish anyway because it looks good on the shelf. The temples are still standing. The schools are still teaching. But every aspect of Greek life now exists within Roman parameters. It's like painting inside lines someone else drew. Still, some Greeks thrive under the empire's long shadow, especially those who learn to play both sides, Greek citizens fluent in Latin, loyal to the empire, and savvy enough to keep their own cities afloat. These men act as middlemen, governors' aides, tax advisors, and diplomats. They host Roman dignitaries with honeyed wine and rehearse speeches about loyalty and mutual respect, all while collecting fat tributes from their neighbours. A little corruption, sure, but that's the Roman way. And as much as it stings, the benefits of being Rome's favourite intellectual pet become hard to ignore. Trade booms. The roads are safer than they have ever been. A farmer in Boeotia can ship his grain to the Italian peninsula without hiring a private army. Greek ports like Delos, Piraeus and Thessalonica become hotspots for Roman goods, merchants and culture. Markets bustle with imported spices and cheap Roman trinkets. You can buy olive oil, a small statue of Aphrodite, and a clay bust of Emperor Tiberius all on the same street. But prosperity has its price. Local Greek traditions start to buckle under the weight of Roman ritual. Old gods are still worshipped, yes, but now they share altars with emperors. Temples once dedicated to Apollo or Athena begin sprouting columns inscribed with dedications to the imperial family. A new form of religious devotion spreads, the imperial cult, where emperors are honoured, or, let's be honest, worshipped as living deities. Greek citizens gather in temples to burn incense not just for the gods, but for Augustus, Tiberius, and every stiff-faced statue Rome ships over. This shift isn't just symbolic, it's political. If your city wants favour, funding, or protection, you'd better be lighting candles for Caesar. You might even build a temple in his honour just to show you're serious. In some places, especially those struggling to regain lost prestige, civic leaders push imperial worship hard. It's like building a VIP lounge for your occupier and hoping they'll notice. Spoiler, they do. One of the quirks of this era is how the empire handles loyalty. The more Romanized you are, the more perks you get. Roman citizenship, once an elite and tightly held privilege, starts to trickle down, especially in the eastern provinces. If you're wealthy, educated, and politically useful, you might find yourself granted citizenship by imperial decree. Suddenly, you can wear a toga legally, use Latin in contracts, and, most importantly, not get crucified for minor crimes. A huge bonus, so you adapt. Maybe you start using Roman measurements in your shop. Maybe you switch the public address system in the amphitheatre to Latin for visiting dignitaries. Maybe your child learns Cicero before he learns Herodotus. None of it feels that dramatic at first, but give it a generation or two, and you've got Greek cities with Roman architecture, Roman laws, Roman holiday calendars, and entire populations who've never known anything else. Still, something of the Greek spirit endures. It always does. The philosophers don't go away, they just adapt too. Stoicism, Epicureanism, Platonism, they all evolve under Roman rule, sometimes even gaining new life. In Athens, the schools still operate, and if you squint, it almost looks like the old days. Students in white robes debating metaphysics, teachers gesturing with polished sticks, rhetoric practiced with the intensity of swordplay. But now, most of the students are Roman, or half Roman, or Greek kids with Roman last names. And the teachers? They are practical, they know where the money comes from. Lessons often include moral nods to Roman ideals, duty, order, hierarchy. A quote from Plato followed by a compliment about the emperor's virtues. Philosophy becomes less about discovering truth and more about helping the wealthy live with themselves. And as long as the Senate keeps paying the bills, nobody complains too loudly. Meanwhile, festivals continue. But they've changed. The great religious celebrations, once fierce expressions of civic identity, are now pageants, reenactments, cultural performances for Roman tourists and curious bureaucrats. You can attend the Panathenaea, watch sacred processions, and then stop by the arena to catch a Roman-sponsored gladiator show later in the afternoon. Because yes, even gladiators have made their way to Greece now. Imported violence stood on marble floors. Some historians argue that this period marks a low point for Greek autonomy, but a high point for its global influence. You see, as Rome expands, so does Greece, in a weird second-hand way. Greek art, literature and philosophy spread across the empire. To Spain, to Gaul, to Britain. When a Roman governor builds a library in Antioch or a theatre in Carthage, it's Greek style he uses, Greek plays he stages, Greek logic he applies to his provincial laws. Greek tutors raise the next generation of Roman elites. It's empire by cultural proxy. And while the average Greek citizen still pays heavy taxes and watches foreigners run their city, they also see their language, ideas and myths etched into the DNA of the empire. That's a strange kind of victory. Not military, not political, but permanent. Even the emperors themselves aren't immune. By the time Nero ascends the throne in the mid-1st century CE, things get almost absurd. Nero doesn't just admire Greek culture, he tries to become it. He tours Greece, competes in musical contests, gives epic performances at theatres where no one dares to boo, and declares himself a champion of the Olympic Games. He even proclaims the liberation of Greece all over again in a grand gesture that absolutely no one takes seriously. Still, the gesture means something. Even the most egotistical emperor in Roman history still feels the need to flatter Greece. That says a lot. And for the Greeks, even a hollow gesture of respect is better than silence. So you stand there now, watching Roman banners flap over your city, listening to priests chant prayers that mix Jupiter and Zeus into the same muddled sentence. You've stopped asking when Greece will be free again. Instead, you ask, what part of us can still survive inside this machine? The answer, strangely, is quite a lot. You just have to squint to see it. It's late summer, maybe 6 or 67 CE, and the wind carries the scent of olive trees and sea salt through the narrow alleys of a once proud Greek city. Perhaps Athens, maybe Thebes, or somewhere humbler, where statues tilt slightly from age, and pigeons are the loudest crowd in the agora. There's something stirring in the air, something restless. The Roman Empire seems distracted, and when Rome blinks, the provinces start to breathe differently. Some exhale relief, others inhale opportunity. You've seen this pattern before. Rome gets comfortable, then chaotic. Emperors rise and fall like actors on a poorly written stage play. And now, under Emperor Nero, yes, that Nero, things are wobbling. He's off gallivanting through Greece, performing poetry on theatre stages, demanding applause from captive audiences, and declaring sacred games reopened just so he can win them. Not exactly what you'd call stable governance. While the empire burns in places, sometimes literally, Nero's main concern is whether he hit the right pitch during his ode to Apollo. And here, in this strange, offbeat chapter of history, the Greeks find a bizarre moment of leverage. You see, Nero's obsession with Greek culture isn't just an eccentricity, it's an opening. The Greek cities, particularly in Achaea, roll out every olive branch they can. They flatter him relentlessly. They rename festivals in his honour. They build shrines, they chant his praises, badly in Latin-accented Greek. And Nero laps it up. He tours the sacred sites, kisses statues, recites poetry while lyre players squint into the sun and wonder how they ended up accompanying a Roman emperor with a flair for drama and zero pitch control. Then, in a grand display of theatrical generosity, Nero stands before a crowd in Corinth and declares, "Greece is free," just like that. He announces the liberation of Achaea from Roman provincial status. No more taxes, he says, no more governors sent from Rome. You are now your own people again, sort of. The crowd roars, though maybe not entirely from joy. Some cheer because they've just heard the word freedom, others because they're too afraid not to, and a few quietly because they can't believe their luck. For a short time it's almost believable. Roman officials step back, local councils flex their muscles, priests dust off rituals no one's dared perform without Roman permission in decades. The streets of Athens glow with torchlight again during processions that feel older than time itself. It's like watching a faded painting come briefly back to life. But if this sounds too good to be true, that's because it is. Nero predictably doesn't last. He loses control of the empire in spectacular fashion. A string of revolts, plots, and general embarrassment lead him to flee Rome in disguise, and eventually end his life in a villa, muttering famously some "What an artist dies in me," and with his death in 68 CE, the short-lived fantasy of Greek autonomy dies with him. Within months, the new Roman Emperor Vespasian reverses everything. Achaea is reabsorbed as a province, taxes are reinstated, governors are appointed, The imperial cult is back in business. The shrines to Nero, quietly taken down or, more awkwardly, rededicated to someone else. Rome shakes itself off, tightens its grip, and pretends the whole Greek liberation thing was just a weird dream, but the memory lingers. Not because it lasted, but because it almost felt real. For a brief, strange moment, Greece had tasted something close to sovereignty, even if it came wrapped in flattery and drama and the political equivalent of theatre makeup. Still, the Greeks adapt. Again, Vespasian, unlike Nero, is a builder, a stabiliser. He doesn't have time for poetry, he has an empire to repair, and part of that repair includes Greece. Under his reign, several cities receive investment. Infrastructure is improved. Roman engineers repair aqueducts, rebuild roads, and expand harbours. Athens, still a crown jewel of culture, receives funding for its schools. Delos regains importance as a religious and commercial centre. In this new, post-Nero age, things become more structured. The Roman bureaucracy tightens, and Greece becomes even more fully integrated into the empire, not just physically, but administratively. Imperial messengers move on freshly paved roads. Provincial records are kept with almost neurotic precision. Even local Greek festivals must now submit budgets and security plans to Roman officials. But here's the irony. Despite the renewed Roman grip, the cultural blending continues at full speed. Greek artists are in demand across the empire. Greek sculptors create likenesses of Roman emperors, often idealized in the style of gods. Greek architects design temples and baths in Gaul and Hispania. Greek teachers are hired to educate Roman children in rhetoric, logic, and what they refer to, often dramatically, as the moral art of living. The further Rome spreads, the more Greek its elite culture becomes. It's as if the empire can't function without sipping from the well of Greek thought. One of the stranger outcomes of this cultural saturation is that the Greek language begins to overtake Latin in parts of the Eastern Empire, not just among locals but among Romans themselves. A Roman official stationed in Athens might speak Greek better than Latin, eat Greek food, write his personal letters in Greek, and worship a hybrid of Greek and Roman deities without even blinking. Greek becomes the lingua franca of the Eastern Roman Empire, not by force but by habit. A subtle victory, one nobody really planned but that unfolded naturally. Even the imperial bureaucracy starts translating official edicts into Greek just to make sure they're understood. Rome rules the world, but it does so in a tongue born from Mount Olympus and sharpened in the schools of Aristotle. Still, the politics remain Roman. If a Greek city tries to test the limits again, challenge attacks, delay tribute, or revive too much of its old political structure, it's met with swift correction. Not dramatic destruction, like the days of Corinth, but quiet surgical pressure. Fines, suspensions, strategic arrests. Rome doesn't need to raise cities anymore to keep control, it just needs to remind people who's in charge. But you can't fully suppress memory. In taverns and symposiums, old men still tell stories of Thermopylae, of Themistocles, of when Greeks ruled not just their own cities, but the seas around them. Young men hear those stories, roll their eyes, but carry them anyway deep in their bones. They might serve Rome, speak Latin, and quote Virgil in the Forum, but they also remember that they walk the same streets once tread by Pericles and Plato. And in that remembrance, something powerful survives, because in the end, Greece isn't lost. It's transformed, adapted, folded into something vast, foreign, and yet oddly familiar. A province, yes, but also a soul, a fragment of the world's past that refuses to be forgotten. Even as Rome reigns, the mind of Greece continues to whisper through every law, every building, every poem, carved into marble with trembling hands. So you stand in a Romanized Greek city, watching the imperial banner flutter in the wind, and you realize this is not a tragedy. It's a metamorphosis. Greece didn't fall. It evolved. The years roll on like a slow river over old stones, wearing them down, polishing the rough edges, sometimes dislodging one completely. Greece, now fully woven into the fabric of the Roman Empire, continues to live, but not as the hero of its own story anymore. It's the wise old counsellor, the faded glory clutched gently by the younger, stronger empire that conquered it. The sun still rises over the Aegean, still bathes the whitewashed temples in honey-coloured light, but the days of city-states and hoplites, of orators and hard-earned freedom, feel like dreams from another lifetime. By the start of the 2nd century CE, Greece is more Roman than some Roman provinces, and yet it doesn't feel foreign. The empire has become a two-way street. Yes, Rome rules from the top down, but culture, art, language, religion seeps from the bottom up. The streets of Corinth, now rebuilt and bustling, hum with Latin merchants haggling over amphorae, while Greek philosophers hold court in shaded courtyards, nodding with exaggerated patience at Roman senators quoting Plato with the passion of a man who's only skimmed the book. It's under the rule of Emperor Hadrian, around 117 to 138 CE, that this strange, delicate dance between conqueror and conquered reaches something resembling harmony. Hadrian, unlike many of his predecessors, doesn't just admire Greek culture, he believes in it. He speaks fluent Greek, shaves his beard like a proper philosopher, reviving a trend that had been out of style in Rome for centuries, and tours the region not like a ruler demanding tribute, but like a pilgrim seeking wisdom. And the Greeks, they adore him. When Hadrian arrives in Athens, the city rolls out every scroll and carpet it owns, temples are scrubbed, statues polished, philosophers rehearse speeches in the mirror. It's not just politics, it's love. Here's a Roman emperor who calls Athens the mother of civilization, who funds restoration projects out of his own treasury, who sits in lectures and nods like a diligent student. For once, the imperial presence doesn't feel like a burden, it feels like a blessing. Hadrian commissions massive construction projects across Greece. In Athens, he completes the long-delayed Temple of Olympian Zeus, a colossal structure that had begun centuries earlier, but was abandoned again and again. Now, under Hadrian's patronage, the temple is finished, towering above the city like a symbol of restored greatness. He also builds an entire neighbourhood, Hadrianopolis, a Roman district grafted onto the Greek city, complete with libraries, bathhouses, and an aqueduct that still trickles through Athenian ruins today. And then there's the Arch of Hadrian, a marble gateway inscribed with two competing identities. On one side, this is Athens, the ancient city of Theseus. On the other, this is the city of Hadrian, not of Theseus. It's not subtle, it's a declaration. The old world lives on, but the new world owns the keys. This dual identity, Greek soul, Roman body, becomes the reality for nearly every city in Greece, even in places where old traditions still flicker. Roman order frames them like the walls of a painted vase. Festivals continue, but now they honour emperors alongside gods. Athletic games resume, with prizes funded by imperial coin. Theatres perform both Euripides and Latin comedies. Statues of Hermes share plazas with busts of Hadrian and Trajan. The layers are visible, but they blend beautifully. Still, not everyone is convinced that this Roman-flavoured golden age is truly golden. A few philosophers gripe in private. They mutter that the youth no longer memorise Homer, that the new generation is more concerned with Roman law than Greek virtue. They complain that temples smell more of perfume than sacred incense, that oracles speak less and bureaucrats more. A few even write tracts warning that Greece has become a museum, beautiful but dead. But those voices are quiet, mostly ignored, because for most people, life under Rome is decent. The roads are paved, the aqueducts run clean, trade is booming. A merchant in Delos can ship goods to Rome, Alexandria or Carthage, with minimal fear of pirates or bandits. A farmer in Arcadia can sell surplus olives to the Roman army. The economy isn't fair, but it functions, and in an empire where rebellion means ruin, functionality is survival. Let's not pretend everything is idyllic, though. There are still cracks in the marble. Roman taxation is relentless. Bureaucrats can be corrupt or cruel. Land consolidation means more small farmers are pushed off their plots, forced to work on estates they once owned. Local councils, boule, still exist but have less real power than ever. And the imperial cult continues to grow, demanding not just loyalty but reverence. There's a creeping sense that the gods of Olympus are being slowly replaced by marble emperors with lifeless eyes. And yet, culture thrives. It's one of history's great ironies. The more politically powerless Greece becomes, the more culturally dominant it is. A Roman noble commissioning a villa in Gaul will ask for mosaics of Achilles. A governor in Egypt might quote Sophocles at a banquet. Even the imperial family consults Greek physicians and astrologers. The Greek way of thinking, structured, idolized, poetic, becomes the intellectual bloodstream of the empire. Rome might provide the muscles, but Greece remains the brain. Hadrian's influence cements this reality. He doesn't just support Greek culture, he institutionalizes it. He creates Panhellenic leagues, encourages the continuation of classical education, and funds temples in places most emperors couldn't even find on a map. In Delphi, he revives the Pythian Games. In Sparta, he restores the old gymnasia. It's like he's trying to revive the entire classical world with a wave of his laurel-wreathed hand. And for a time, it works. Hadrian leaves behind a legacy of marble and memory, a dream of what a blended empire could look like. Not just conquest, but cooperation. Not just domination, but admiration. It's a rare moment in history when both sides of a conquest seem satisfied, even proud of the shared identity they've built. But the dream has limits. Hadrian dies in 138 CE, and while his successor Antoninus Pius continues many of his policies, the balance begins to shift again. Later emperors are less Greek in their affections, more Roman in their expectations. The bureaucracy tightens, taxes rise, and beneath the surface new currents begin to stir, currents that neither Rome nor Greece fully understand yet. Still, as the century moves on, a Greek citizen, perhaps you, can walk through a city with Roman roads, Greek temples, Latin graffiti, and bilingual street signs. You might worship Zeus in the morning, attend a lecture on Stoicism at noon, and offer a coin at the altar of the divine Hadrian by dusk. You may no longer live in an independent Greece, but you live in something that, in its own odd way, still feels like home. Because in this new empire, where cultures clash and coalesce, one truth remains: the Greek spirit survives. It's easy to forget, standing in the soft golden light of a Greek afternoon in the mid-2nd century CE, that this land once shaped the very foundations of Western civilization. That behind the facades of Roman-built marketplaces and forums lies a much older heartbeat, one that thuds a little quieter these days, but never stops. The marble is smoother now, more polished, less cracked. The theatres are fuller too, thanks to the empire's wealth, and on stage men still wear masks of tragedy and comedy, playing roles that are centuries old but somehow still relevant. It's beautiful, it's familiar, but it's not the same. You can feel it when you walk down the streets of Athens. Yes, the schools are open. The philosophers still argue in courtyards, drawing lines in the dirt with sticks and shaking their fists at clouds. But the crowd has changed. Now, it's Roman boys in spotless tunics, chewing olives with half interest as their tutors rant about virtue. They're here to become civilized, to polish off their Latin upbringing with a layer of Greek sophistication before they go back to Rome and rule a province or two. They're respectful mostly, curious sometimes, but they're not Greeks. And for all their admiration, they don't understand what it meant, what it means to be from the land of Homer, Herodotus, and Thucydides. To live where democracy was born and buried, where the gods once walked, or at least were believed to, where freedom was once worth dying for, not something granted by an emperor in a mood. But hey, this is the price of peace, right? The empire under the so-called Five Good Emperors is at its most stable. After Hadrian comes Antoninus Pius, who rules with quiet efficiency, rarely leaves Italy, and lets the provinces breathe. Then comes Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher emperor, a man who writes about stoicism by candlelight while waging brutal wars on the Danube. Greece respects him, how could they not? He quotes Epictetus and Plato, pens meditations in Greek, and seems to genuinely believe in virtue. For a little while you might even convince yourself that things are working, that the fusion is real, that Rome and Greece have become one truly. But Marcus Aurelius is followed by Commodus, and the whole world seems to hold its breath. Here's the thing about empires: they don't fall in a day, they decay, slowly, almost invisibly, until one morning you wake up and realise the pillars have cracks, and the statues are missing fingers. Commodus, obsessed with gladiators and power games, doesn't care about Greek philosophy or culture. He doesn't tour the provinces with reverence. He doesn't fund temples. He doesn't read Plato. He renames Rome after himself. What chance does Corinth have? Under his rule, the empire begins to fray, not dramatically at first, but at the edges. In the provinces, governors become more corrupt, more self-serving. Tax burdens increase, especially in the east. Greek cities that once flourished under Hadrian now struggle to maintain their infrastructure. Aqueducts leak. Theatres close early, local councils groan under the weight of imperial expectations with no imperial generosity to match. The Roman Empire still owns Greece, of course. The legions are still stationed nearby. The imperial cult still thrives, with temples to dead emperors popping up like shrines to old rock stars. But something has shifted. Rome has grown tired of pretending to be Greek, and Greece has grown tired of pretending this arrangement still works. One particularly telling moment comes in the form of a tax scandal. Roman administrators in several Greek cities, especially in Boeotia and Thessaly, begin overtaxing and embezzling funds, padding their own villas while local citizens starve. The Roman courts do nothing. Complaints are ignored. Appeals are lost in bureaucratic fog. The system, once a well-oiled machine of cultural exchange, starts to sputter like an old cartwheel in the mud. And yet, despite it all, the Greeks endure. They always do. Some city-states manage to cling to a flicker of autonomy. Not politically, those days are long gone, but culturally. They keep their local festivals alive. They recite Homer in the open air. They teach their children the old names of the constellations before the Latin ones take over. It's resistance, but not with swords, with memory. There's even a resurgence, a last breath of Greek pride in the form of Second Sophistic, a literary and rhetorical movement that floods the empire with Greek orators, poets, and public intellectuals. Men like Aelius Aristides and Herodes Atticus become celebrities, performing speeches in ancient style, reviving the rhythms of Pericles and Demosthenes. Their words don't change laws, they don't topple emperors, but they do something else. They remind people that Greece still has a voice, that its tongue hasn't been cut out even if it now speaks through Roman lips. Herodes Atticus in particular is a fascinating figure. A Greek aristocrat with immense wealth and Roman favour, he uses his resources to rebuild monuments, fund public works, and support education across Greece. His greatest gift, the Odeon of Herodes Atticus in Athens, a massive stone theatre nestled beneath the Acropolis. It's not just a monument, it's a statement. That Greek art is alive, that it still matters, even now, but there's always tension, because even as the Greek world shines under its Roman veneer, it's haunted by what it used to be. Freedom as a concept lingers like perfume in an empty room. You can't see it, but you know it was there, and no matter how much Latin is carved into marble, the Greek underneath never quite fades. Fringe scholars of the time, those eccentric types with scrolls spilling from their sleeves, begin to argue something radical, that Greece didn't lose to Rome. Not really, that it allowed itself to be absorbed in exchange for preserving its mind. That while Rome owns the roads, the military, the bureaucracy, it's Greece that owns the soul of the empire. That every time a Roman noble quotes Aristotle or builds a villa with Doric columns, Greece wins a little. It's an idea both comforting and delusional, depending on how you look at it. Meanwhile, outside the city walls, the world is changing. New religions spread quietly through back alleys and hidden courtyards. One in particular, a small strange sect called Christianity, begins to take root in port towns and among the lower classes. Rome doesn't pay much attention yet, and most Greeks don't either. But its presence marks a subtle turning point, a new thread woven into the tapestry. The old gods, Zeus, Apollo, Athena, still stand tall in marble, but the prayers are quieter now, the sacrifices fewer. Some temples are empty more days than not destroyed, not defiled, just empty. So you walk through your city, Athens or Corinth or Ephesus, and you see all of this. The Roman governors with their crisp tunics and bored expressions. The Greek elders in their worn-out cloaks quoting Homer to anyone who'll listen. The marble steps worn down by 1,000 years of sandals. And you realise this isn't the same Greece your ancestors knew, but it's also not gone. It's changed. Maybe that's enough. By the 3rd century CE, something subtle begins to settle into the bones of Greece. Fatigue. Not just the weariness of age or taxes or governors who can't pronounce local names, but something deeper. An existential tiredness. The kind that comes from knowing that your world, the one built by your ancestors, sung by poets, debated by philosophers, no longer belongs to you. It's still there, technically. The temples haven't all fallen. The schools still echo with verses, but the ownership, the soul of it, that's been leased out for centuries. And now, even the empire itself is starting to fray. You can feel it in the roads. The stone cracks more often, repairs come slower. You feel it in the markets, where once rich merchants now sell chipped amphorae, and the coins bear emperors who ruled for 7 months before being stabbed in a bathhouse. The Roman Empire, once a gleaming machine that stretched from Britannia to Mesopotamia, is wheezing. Civil wars erupt like blisters across the provinces. Generals declare themselves emperors every other Tuesday. The throne changes hands more than a borrowed scroll. and the gods, both old and new, watch in exhausted silence. For Greece it's a strange moment. The province of Achaia, always somewhat peripheral, doesn't bear the worst of the violence. There are no Goths storming the walls just yet, no barbarian hordes trampling the vineyards. But the tension is there, like a smell before rain. The imperial attention has shifted. Once, Greek cities basked in Roman patronage. Now they're barely getting crumbs. The emperor's name still hangs on the banners during festivals, but no one expects him to visit. Half the time, no one even knows who the emperor is anymore. Local elites, those wealthy Greek families who adapted to Roman rule generations ago, now shoulder most of the administrative burden. They fund public works, repair temples, and host games to keep the illusion alive. But it's all thinner than it used to be. The marble facades hide crumbling interiors. The processions are shorter. The applause a little too rehearsed. And in the countryside, the rot spreads faster. Small towns suffer under the weight of imperial taxation, with collectors demanding gold the people simply don't have. In desperation, some farmers abandon their land, slipping into the hills or joining local warlords promising protection. Others sell what little they own to pay a debt that never shrinks. The age of the polis, the proud independent city-state, is long gone. Now, you're lucky if your village can afford a functioning aqueduct. Even the gods seem to be packing up. Temples are quieter, the rituals more rote than reverent. You walk past the once bustling sanctuary of Apollo, and the gates are shut on a feast day. No incense, no hymns, just a priest sweeping dust from the altar while avoiding your eyes. In some places, statues of emperors have more flowers than the old Olympians. Not because people love the emperors, but because they fear what happens if they don't show the proper respect. The gods demand belief. The emperors demand loyalty. Still, Greece isn't quite ready to vanish. In cities like Athens and Ephesus, the intellectual life limps on. There are still teachers, still students, still long-winded speeches about the nature of the cosmos and the morality of governance. The second sophistic movement, once a brilliant burst of Greek rhetorical revival, has dimmed, but its embers still glow. Occasionally a young orator will rise, dazzle the crowds, earn a statue in the forum, and then disappear into the bureaucracy like a song fading into wind. But something else is happening too. Something new. That strange little sect from the east, the Christians, they're not so little anymore. You first noticed them years ago. Quiet gatherings in homes, cringe symbols scratched into walls, whispers of a man who died and rose again. At first, they seemed like just another mystery cult. Rome was full of those, cults to Isis, Mithra, Scibli. Most people assumed Christianity would pass like the rest. But it didn't. It spread, especially in the cities, among the poor, the slaves, the ones who didn't feel at home in the glittering, fading world of temples and taxes. At first, the Christians are tolerated. Then, as they grow bolder, refusing to worship the emperor, condemning the old gods, they're targeted. Persecution flares up under certain emperors. Churches are burned, leaders executed, but the movement only grows stronger. For many Greeks, disillusioned with both Rome and the ancient pantheon, Christianity offers something the others don't. Hope, not just for this life, but the next. By the middle of the century, Christian communities exist in nearly every major Greek city. They're still small, still cautious, but they're organised and determined. They preach in Greek, they write in Greek, they debate theology with the same passion Socrates used to debate virtue. It's not a replacement of Greek identity, it's a repurposing. A new form of philosophical inquiry wrapped in faith instead of logic. And in a strange poetic twist, the spread of Christianity keeps Greek alive. As Roman culture fractures under the weight of its own ambition, Greek becomes the language of the Eastern Church, of Scripture, of the educated faithful. The Gospels, the letters, the creeds, they're all preserved in the same tongue once used to praise Athena and Apollo. But not everyone is ready for this transformation. In some corners of Greece, especially the older cities, resistance to Christianity is fierce. Temples are defended with swords. Pagan festivals are held defiantly. Local leaders still pour wine on the altars of Zeus and call it tradition. They see the Christians not as saviours, but usurpers, new gods with no sense of poetry, no taste for tragedy. A young Christian convert might walk past a statue of Hermes and spit at its feet. An old poet sees that and weeps. The tension simmers, sometimes it boils. Fights break out in marketplaces, mobs form during feast days, statues are defaced. One city's council votes to close the temples, another fights to keep them open. Even within families, the divide grows. A father lights a lamp to Hera, his daughter prays to the Nazarene. They eat dinner in silence. This isn't conquest anymore, it's cultural evolution, and evolution, as always, is messy. And so you walk the streets of this fractured, changing land. You pass Roman bathhouses with cracked mosaics, Christian chapels tucked into old shrines, broken altars piled beside roadside crosses. You hear Greek spoken in every corner, but it's not the Greek of Pericles. It's leaner now, infused with new meanings, new prayers, new names. The words still sound the same, but they speak a different world. You wonder sometimes, is this the end of Greece or just the latest costume? Because through it all, Rome's fall, Christianity's rise, the slow decay of temples and triumphs, Greece doesn't disappear. It adapts. Again. Always. By the beginning of the 4th century CE, the sun still rises over Mount Olympus, but fewer people care what the gods atop it think. Their names are still carved into stone, yes, on temples, on coins, in the fading lines of old prayers, but the voices that once called to them are quieter now. You walk through a once sacred grove, and where incense used to hang heavy in the air, there's only silence and dust. Somewhere nearby, a group of Christians gathers in a repurposed storeroom, lighting lamps and whispering hymns in Greek, new songs for a new age, because now everything is changing again. It happens in fits and starts, not with the crash of a city wall or the scream of a battlefield, but through decrees, conversions, and strange, slow shifts in what people believe. The Roman Empire is no longer just Roman, it's becoming Christian, and for Greece that change is both unsettling and oddly familiar, because it's once again caught in the middle of a transformation too big to stop. Enter Constantine the Great. He rises to power amid civil war, chaos, and collapsing institutions. By 312 CE, he's Emperor of the West. By 324, he controls the entire empire. And with him comes a new vision, one that permanently alters the trajectory of Greece and the rest of the Roman world. In 313, he issues the Edict of Milan, which doesn't force Christianity on anyone, not yet, but legalizes it, protects it, and, crucially, aligns it with imperial power, which had been watching Christianity grow from underground cult to regional movement, now sees it crowned. Suddenly churches are being built out in the open with real funding. Bishops walk through city streets not in fear but in procession. Christian texts, once hidden in caves and cellars, are now copied openly, studied, debated. The new faith is no longer a whisper, it's the loudest voice in the room. But it's not a clean transition. You can see it in the eyes of the old temple priests, standing in doorways watching their flocks shrink. You hear it in the grumbling of poets who remember the days when Zeus was more than myth. And you feel it in the cities, where Greek identity is suddenly being rewritten again, this time not by Roman generals but by theologians. Athens, once the philosophical heart of the classical world, finds itself awkwardly caught between worlds. Its academies remain, its marble halls still echo with syllogisms, but now Christian thinkers dominate the conversation. Men like Gregory of Nazianzus and Basil of Caesarea, Greeks by birth, Christians by faith, begin weaving old philosophy into Christian theology, blending Plato with Paul, Aristotle with Augustine. It's an intellectual balancing act, performed on a tightrope stretched over a chasm of fading gods. Some scholars call this era the Christianization of Hellenism. Others call it the Hellenization of Christianity. Either way, something new is being forged, and Greece is once again the furnace. Meanwhile, Constantine does something bold. He builds a new capital. Not in Rome, not in the west at all, but in the east, on the old Greek city of Byzantium. He renames it Constantinople, and suddenly, the eastern half of the empire, long considered secondary, becomes the centre of power. It's a Roman city, but also a Greek one. Latin in law, but Greek in language. And it will matter more and more in the years to come. For Greece, this shift is monumental. The emperor is now close, not in distant Italy, but just across the Aegean. Greek becomes the dominant language of administration in the east. Trade routes shift. Governors report to Constantinople. The cultural gap between Rome and Greece, once so wide, narrows into something resembling a shared identity. Not entirely equal, but far more connected than before. But while political power may be moving closer, religious change continues to sweep through like a tide, washing away the old and replacing it with the unfamiliar. The temples, those ancient homes of the gods, become targets, not of violence at first, but of neglect. Funding dries up, repairs stop, pilgrims stop coming. A roof collapses here, a statue is stolen there. Eventually it's just weeds and wind. And then comes Theodosius I. In 391 CE, he does what no emperor before him dared. He bans the old religions outright. Pagan rituals are outlawed. Sacrifice is forbidden. The temples, once the lifeblood of Greek civic life, are shuttered. Some are looted, others converted into churches. A few are left to rot. The Parthenon survives, for now, but the gods it honoured have lost their legal right to exist. For many Greeks, this is a moment of spiritual whiplash. Their ancestors worshipped these gods for 1,000 years, built cities for them, fought wars for them. Now, that entire world is not just fete, it's forbidden. Still, some resist in quiet ways. In the mountains and remote villages, small pagan communities carry on, lighting lamps in Mardu's secret, singing old hymns by moonlight. A farmer might still pour wine on the earth before planting. A widow might whisper a prayer to Demeter before baking bread. These acts aren't rebellion, they're memory. But even memories are dangerous now. The Christian church grows stronger, more structured. Bishops wield real power. The lines between spiritual authority and political influence blur. Debates erupt over doctrine, big ones. Councils are called, heretics are named, factions form, and through it all, the Greek-speaking world plays a central role. The early church fathers write in Greek, argue in Greek, preach in Greek. The very language of salvation is shaped by the syntax of Sophocles. Greek, once the language of gods, now becomes the language of God. But if you look closely, you can still see the old Greece peeking through the cracks, in the structure of the church hymns, in the architecture of the basilicas, in the ethical reasoning of Christian thinkers. This isn't a clean break from the past, it's a transformation, a new identity wearing the robes of the old. And that identity, Christian, Greek, imperial, will soon become the foundation of something entirely different, Byzantium, but not yet, not officially. For now, Greece is still a Roman province, still part of an empire. But it's a different Rome, a Rome that worships one god, a Rome that speaks more Greek than Latin, a Rome that no longer builds temples, but builds churches that echo with chants instead of oracles. So you stand again, in a city that looks familiar but feels strange. The statues are still there, though some have been beheaded or defaced. The columns still rise, though many support crosses now. And the people, they still speak Greek, still love stories, still argue about politics, still sing, still cook, still dream. But their dreams are no longer guarded by the old gods. The world has turned again, and Greece, ever resilient, turns with it. It's strange to think that the land of Marathon and Mycenae, of Delphi and Demosthenes, is now mostly a memory palace. The marble bones are still here. Whitewashed ruins scattered across hillsides overgrown with time and silence, but the spirit has moved on. It hasn't died, exactly. It's been translated, rewritten in new scripts, spoken in new tones. By the early 5th century CE, Greece is no longer the land of philosophers and hoplites. It's a Christian land now, firmly and officially. And its new voice echoes not in oracles, but in the chants of priests echoing beneath vaulted basilica ceilings. If you're alive now, say in Corinth or Athens, you've grown up with the cross, not the thunderbolt. The temples of the Olympians are empty or converted, the old statues locked away, buried or destroyed. No one prays to Hera for a safe childbirth. No one sacrifices to Poseidon before setting sail. Instead, mothers light candles to the Virgin Mary, and sailors trace crosses in the air before pushing off from port. The Greek language hasn't vanished. It's thriving, actually, but its vocabulary is shifting. Once the tongue of Homer, it's now the language of the Gospel of John. New phrases fill the air. Kyrios Jesus, Kyrie eleison. The syllables are familiar, but the meanings are foreign, yet comfortingly so. The philosophers might grumble in their graves, but the people have moved on. They have to. Life under the Roman Empire, well, what's left of it, isn't kind to nostalgia. And what is left of the empire? It depends where you're standing. In the west, Rome is falling apart, literally. The Visigoths sack the city in 410 CE, and the world gasps. Rome, the eternal city brought to its knees by barbarians in wolfskins and war paint. It's a moment that shakes the old foundations, but here in Greece, the impact feels more distant, like thunder from another valley. Troubling, yes, but not yet dangerous. That's because Greece, unlike its western cousins, now belongs to what will soon be called the Eastern Roman Empire, what we much later will call Byzantium. And Byzantium, for all its court intrigue and civil squabbles, is stable, at least more stable than the West. The new capital, Constantinople, glitters on the Bosporus like a jewel in a crown that's still being polished. The emperor rules from there now, not from Rome, and the emperor, of course, is Christian. For Greece, this realignment means a lot of things, some subtle, some monumental. First, the Greek cities now look eastward, not westward. Constantinople is the cultural magnet, the political sun around which provincial stars orbit. When a Greek bishop has a dispute, he appeals to Constantinople. When a local noble seeks advancement, he does so through Byzantine channels. The old connections to Italy, to the Roman Senate, to the Latin-speaking world, they're fading. Fast. Second, the identity of what it means to be Greek is shifting. It's no longer tied to civic pride or philosophical lineage. It's becoming entwined with orthodoxy. To be Greek now is increasingly to be Christian, to sing the liturgy in a Hellenized form of koine, to celebrate feast days instead of Dionysian revels. And while that may sound like cultural defeat, it's something more nuanced. Because the Greeks aren't just passive passengers in this new world, they're shaping it. Greek theologians dominate the early church councils. Their writings, their arguments, their precise and sometimes maddening obsession with doctrine become the spine of Christian orthodoxy. The Council of Nicaea, written in Greek, the Nicene Creed, Greek, the great doctrinal battles between Arians and Trinitarians, fought with Greek verbs. You can ban the old gods, burn the old scrolls, but you can't keep the Greek mind out of the conversation. And if you visit the cities now, especially Athens or Thessalonica, you'll see a strange mix of old and new everywhere you turn. A converted temple, its columns wrapped in mosaics of saints. A theatre used for Christian pageants, not tragedies. A public bathhouse still functioning, though now under church oversight to make sure nobody's enjoying themselves too much. Rome brought the roads, Christianity brings the rules, but the cities aren't thriving like they once did. The golden age of marble grandeur and civic splendour is long over. Some towns shrink into villages, others are raided by pirates or neglected by distant governors. Earthquakes don't help, neither do occasional plagues. Even the once mighty city of Delphi, sacred seat of Apollo's oracle, now lies abandoned, its sacred spring quiet, its temple in ruins. No one comes for answers anymore, they ask bishops instead. Still, for all this decay, there's a strange kind of continuity. You walk the streets of Corinth and see a child playing next to a toppled column, tracing letters in the dust. Greek letters, the same ones written in Plato's dialogues and now in Paul's epistles. The child may never read Aristotle, but he might read the Book of Acts. He'll grow up Greek. He'll call himself Roman. He'll pray in the same tongue used to praise the old gods, now redirected toward one. And you realise, standing there in the middle of this slow-motion metamorphosis, that Greece is doing what it's always done. It's adapting. That's been its secret all along, not brute strength, not unity, certainly not political genius, but resilience. A kind of cultural flexibility that bends with the times without ever quite breaking. It did it under Macedon, under Rome, now under Byzantium, and still the Greek voice murmurs on, shifting dialects, swapping myths, but never falling silent. A fringe theory floats among modern historians, that the Christianization of Greece was less an erasure and more a conversion in the original sense of the word. Not a destruction, but a turning. The ideas didn't vanish, they just took new forms. Instead of Achilles, we have martyrs. Instead of symposiums, we have sermons. The form changed. The soul, maybe not so much. Of course, not everyone agrees. Some say something precious was lost, something uniquely vibrant, questioning, playful. That when the old gods were silenced, so was a worldview that celebrated chaos and beauty and contradiction. Christianity, they argue, smoothed everything down, made it rigid, predictable, dogmatic. Maybe, but history rarely moves in straight lines. So you stand again on a hill overlooking a city whose name has outlived kings and conquerors. You listen, not for war drums or priestly chants, but for the quiet hum of continuity, children playing, priests chanting, doves roosting in old stone crevices. This isn't the Greece of Pericles, or Alexander, or even Flamininus, but it's still Greece, and that somehow feels like enough. You wake in a house whose stones were laid by men long dead, under a roof repaired by generations who spoke the same language, but lived in entirely different worlds. Your city's name is Greek. The street signs are Greek. The prayers at dawn echo in Greek. But the empire you live in, the one that taxes your grain, patrols your ports and sends governors to recite decrees from marble platforms, is no longer Roman in spirit, only in name. This is Byzantium now, even if no one calls it that yet. It's the mid-5th century CE. And if Greece once stood at the crossroads of east and west, it's now leaning fully east. Constantinople reigns supreme. Its domes rise like a second sun over the Bosporus, and the empire's power radiates outward from there. The Western Roman Empire, Old Rome itself, has become a crumbling memory. Barbarian kings now sit on thrones in Ravenna and Carthage, wearing imperial titles like oversized costumes, pretending the show isn't already over. But here in the east, the show continues. Greece, once a proud actor in its own right, now performs as part of an ensemble cast, a crucial, beloved character, but no longer the lead. And yet it's everywhere behind the scenes. In the imperial court, Greek is the language of bureaucracy. Latin still has its ceremonial place, like a crusty old senator no one quite knows how to dismiss. But the real work gets done in Greek. Government memos, religious treatises, tax ledgers, imperial commands, Greek, Greek, Greek. It's a quiet kind of comeback. Greek cities may not wield the swords, but they hold the scrolls. The scholars, the monks with calloused fingers hunched over lamps in monasteries, copying not just scripture but fragments of Aristotle and Homer, of Sophocles and Herodotus. Entire libraries are preserved not in Rome, which burned and fell and changed hands, but here, in the Eastern Empire, in lands where Greek never died, just adapted. Still, life is not gentle. The 5th century is no golden age. The world is stormy, literally and metaphorically. Earthquakes shake the ground beneath Corinth and Patras. Floods strike the plains of Boeotia. Invasions come, not always to Greece directly, but close enough to send shivers down the spines of its citizens. The Huns, with their wild eyes and impossible speed, storm through the Balkans. The Goths, no longer the terrifying newcomers they once were, still wander through imperial lands like unwanted guests refusing to leave. Greece is spared the worst, but not untouched. Many of its cities are fortified again. Walls rise where there were none, watchtowers are built, gates are repaired. There's a sense now that danger is always nearby, that no peace will last forever. Even in the quiet countryside, farmers start hiding their valuables underground. Not because they're paranoid, but because they've heard the stories of cities sacked, churches looted, statues smashed, and yet daily life grinds on. Markets open at dawn, chickpeas and honey are bartered over cracked counters. Children learn their alphabets, scratching letters into wax tablets. Alpha, beta, gamma, not knowing those same letters once crowned the gates of academies where Plato taught. The past is still here, but it's buried under layers of practical survival. In religion, things continue to shift. The church now dominates not just the spiritual life of the Greeks, but their cultural and civic life as well. Bishops aren't just priests, they're judges, administrators, protectors. In cities where the imperial bureaucracy is too slow or corrupt, it's often the bishop who handles disputes, distributes grain during famines, negotiates peace with invaders. He wears a cross instead of a sword, but he governs all the same. Churches become the new temples. And what churches! In Athens, in Thessalonica, even in smaller cities. Domes rise with mosaics that glitter in candlelight, saints staring down with eyes too wide to be human. In some places, these churches are built right on top of old sanctuaries. A basilica over a temple to Apollo, a chapel inside what used to be a gymnasium, stone on stone, one age layered over another. And then there are the saints. Greece begins to produce its own holy men, monks who retreat to caves in the mountains, hermits who fast until they collapse, martyrs who defy imperial power when it suits them, and mystics who claim visions of heaven. They replace the old heroes. Once the people told tales of Achilles and Heracles. Now they whisper about St. Nestor, who threw himself into battle with only prayer as his armour. Or St. Basil, whose words move hearts harder than bronze. The stories change, but the shape remains. Even festivals adapt. The great processions of Dionysus are gone, but in their place are Easter parades, with incense and icons held high. The wine still flows, but it's blessed now. The dancing is more subdued. No masks, just candles and chants. The joy remains, but it's trimmed, controlled, dressed in orthodoxy. Some thinkers argue that what's happening isn't just cultural replacement, it's a transformation of memory itself. The stories people tell themselves about who they are, where they come from, and what they value have been rewritten. The gods are no longer in the sky, they're in heaven. The heroes are no longer demigods, they're saints. Salvation is no longer found in glory, but in humility. And yet every so often someone uncovers an old statue buried in the soil, headless maybe, or missing an arm. A boy picks it up, asks who it was. An old man shrugs. Perhaps Athena or some noble of the old world, they prop it near a well, and eventually someone else forgets what it was and uses it as a bench. This is how Greece carries its past now, not with fanfare, but in fragments. It lives in the syllables of liturgy, in the geometry of architecture, in the very bones of the cities. The empire may be Byzantine now in all but name, but Greece never really stopped being Greece. It just learned how to wear new clothes. So you walk through the ruins and they're rebuilt, the temples turned into churches, the theatres half buried in dust, and you hear two sounds, the echo of what was and the chant of what is. They don't compete, they harmonise. Greece hasn't vanished, it's just layered, and each generation adds its own stone. The century turns again, as centuries tend to do, and by the 6th century CE, Greece finds itself deep inside the Byzantine cocoon. The transformation is no longer new, no longer in progress, it's complete. If a Roman from Caesar's time were dropped into this world, he'd be as confused as a goat in a bathhouse. He'd hear Greek in the streets, see crosses on every building, and recognise no one in the imperial portraits. The senators are gone, the togas are gone, even the old gods are just faint outlines on eroded pediments. But ask any local and they'll still say they live in the Roman Empire. It's a wonderful lie. Not malicious, not delusional, just the kind of convenient fiction that empires thrive on. Technically, they're right. The empire never fell here. The emperors still reign from Constantinople, the taxes still get collected. The roads still link city to city, some of them the same stone veins laid down by Roman engineers centuries earlier. But the soul of the empire is Byzantine now, and Greece, long ago absorbed, has become part of that spiritual body, not merely a province anymore, but one of its vital organs. Under Emperor Justinian the Funestus, everything is magnified. His rule, beginning in 527 CE, is nothing if not ambitious. He doesn't just want to reign, he wants to restore, to make Rome great again, in a way that demands gold, granite, and a lot of architectural overcompensation. He's remembered best for the Hagia Sophia, a dome so vast it seems to float on light, but his influence reaches Greece just as powerfully. New churches rise from Thessalonica to Athens, glittering with mosaics so rich in colour and glass they shimmer like water. Saints with unnerving eyes watch over worshippers. Floors are laid with intricate marble designs. Incense smoke curls through the air like prayers with form. The empire is flexing not just its faith but its aesthetic muscle. And Greece, always the empire's artistic core, is where the vision is realised. But all that glitter sits atop a tremulous ground, literal. Earthquakes in the Aegean are as regular as taxes. Cities crumble and rebuild and crumble again. Epidemics break out. The plague of Justinian most notably in 541 CE, a pandemic that sweeps through the empire like a tide of death. In Constantinople alone, thousands die each day at its peak. Greece is struck hard. In Athens, trade halts. In Thebes, fields go unharvested. Monks pray, doctors fumble, and the streets grow quiet with absence. It's in moments like this that the old gods come to mind, not because people miss them exactly, but because they remember a time when the world seemed governed by caprice, not contagion. When plagues were punishments from Apollo, and healing could be bought with sacrifice and song. Christianity has its answers too, of course. Sin, divine testing, humility, but the suffering feels just as ancient. In the countryside, villages huddle into tighter communities. Walls are rebuilt, not just around cities but around lives. Local bishops become more powerful than ever. They lead not just prayers, but policies. If you want a new aqueduct dug or a tax relief granted, you don't write to Constantinople anymore. You go to the church. Sometimes the line between civil and sacred disappears entirely. Still, not all is gloom. Trade, once sluggish, begins to shift. New routes open. Greek merchants, ever adaptable, begin thriving in a world where caravans from Syria bring silk and ships from Egypt unload spices and papyrus at Athenian docks. Thessalonica in particular becomes a shining star, bustling, fortified and positioned perfectly on the Via Egnatia, the ancient Roman road that still pulses with life. The Greek people, for their part, have adjusted. They are not mourning the old days anymore, not really. Most have no memory of temples that weren't churches, or gods that weren't saints. A child born now knows only icons, incense and empire. Homer might still be taught in some elite schools, but it's the Bible that forms the moral backbone of daily life. Language too has changed, softened, shifted, evolved. This isn't the ancient Greek of Socrates or the Attic dialect of the Golden Age. This is medieval Greek now, fluid, peppered with idioms, and fused with the rhythms of the church. People still speak of the polis, but now it means a town, not a sovereign city-state. Ethnos still means people, but not in the way Herodotus used it. Even logos, the grand, sprawling word once meaning reason, speech or principle, has narrowed its focus. Now it means the word, as in the Gospel of John. In the beginning was the logos. This is what history does. It doesn't erase, it rewrites. Even the artistic style has morphed. Gone are the sculptures of idealized forms, the bodies that once tried to mimic the gods. Byzantine art prefers front-facing saints, solemn and flat, their beauty not in anatomy but in symbolism. The goal isn't to impress with realism, but to instruct, to inspire, to guide your thoughts upward rather than inward. A statue of Athena inspired confidence. A mosaic of Mary inspires awe. And in all this, a new kind of patriotism emerges, not for Greece as it once was, but for what it has become. Greek identity is now tied not to independence, but to orthodoxy, to being the faithful defenders of the true Christian tradition. When heresies rise in distant provinces, it's Greek bishops who crush them. When questions arise over doctrine, it's Greek theologians who define them. There's an unspoken pride here. Quiet, measured, deeply rooted. No one shouts about Greek greatness anymore, but they don't have to. It's in the foundations of every church, in the syllables of every prayer, in the olive oil pressed by hands that have tilled the same soil since before Rome even had kings. Of course, there are still whispers. Travellers passing through tell of barbarians on the move again. The Slavs are pressing southward. The borders near Thrace are less secure than they once were. The empire stretches, and some say it's beginning to thin, but in Greece people have heard this before. For centuries now they've watched empires rise and fracture and stitch themselves back together. What matters isn't the emperor's name, it's that the water still flows through the aqueduct, that the bell still rings in the chapel, that the language still holds its shape. Because Greece, whatever you choose to call it, whatever empire claims it, is still here. A little older, a little quieter, but never gone. By the 7th century CE, Greece no longer looks back with longing. It's too busy keeping its head above water. The past is still here, yes. In the cracks between stones, in the liturgy echoing through domes, in the names of villages that once housed philosophers and gods. But now the present is louder. The empire has entered what some historians will later call the Byzantine Dark Age, though the darkness is more about mystery than collapse. The records grow scarce, the ruins grow thicker, and in Greece the quiet becomes more pronounced. This isn't the theatrical collapse of empires. No flaming cities or dramatic betrayals. Instead, Greece fades, not vanishes. A soft decay, a hollowing of spaces once full. The great urban centres, Athens, Corinth, Argos, Sparta, dwindle, both in numbers and in significance. Cities shrink into fortified hilltops. Entire regions are depopulated by plague, war, or simple neglect. Farmers abandon fields once measured and taxed with obsessive Roman precision. Roads crumble, the theatres are empty, and yet not abandoned. People still live here, just differently, more cautiously, more communally. The grand city-states are no longer cultural dynamos but regional waypoints. The Forum is a livestock market now, the gymnasium houses goats. A temple's marble is repurposed into a bishop's palace. Nothing is wasted, only transformed. This is the age of transition, and transitions are never glamorous. The Slavic migrations into the Balkans during this period bring deep and lasting change. Entire tribes move southward into Thessaly, Epirus, and the Peloponnese, establishing settlements that blur the line between invader and immigrant. There are battles, to be sure, raids, skirmishes, but more often there's absorption. Intermarriage, shared fields, bartered peace. Greece, that old crossroads of Mediterranean empires, becomes a cultural quilt once again. And yet the Byzantine state does not let go. Emperor Heraclius, who comes to power in 610 CE, is fighting wars on every side against Persians in the east, Avars in the north, and eventually the explosive expansion of Arab Muslim forces. He doesn't have time to dote on Greece, but he doesn't abandon it either. Administrative reforms are introduced, namely the theme system, where military and civil authority are combined in regional districts. Greece is absorbed into these new themes, like Hellas and Peloponnesos, which will shape its identity for centuries. The themes are practical, decentralized, defense-focused. They turn provinces into self-sustaining military zones, where soldiers are paid with land and loyalty has grown through familiarity, not paperwork. It's not the old Roman model of distant governors and bureaucratic delay. It's rougher, but it works. In the midst of all this, something else begins to happen. Christianity, already dominant, takes deeper root, not just in liturgy, but in culture, language, and worldview. The church becomes not only the shepherd of souls, but the primary bearer of memory. Monasteries spring up in mountain valleys and island retreats, safe from raids and distant from imperial politics. These become centres of literacy, art, and continuity. If Greece is retreating from the world stage, it is also preserving itself in quiet corners. Inside these monasteries, monks copy not just scripture but science, mathematics, astronomy, even fragments of ancient drama. It's ironic, those bearded cloistered men with candles and fasting regimens are the reason we even have Plato and Euripides today. The old knowledge lives on, hidden behind icons and chants, and in daily life the classical and the Christian continue to overlap. Peasant women name their children after saints, but also after Homeric heroes. A man may pray to St. George for his harvest, while still leaving a small offering under an old oak tree, just in case. The theological purists might frown, but reality is messier than doctrine, especially in Greece, where belief is more like a landscape than a creed, layered, ancient, contradictory, and deeply felt. Meanwhile, on the coasts, trade refuses to die. Greek sailors, forever stubborn, keep navigating the Aegean and Ionian like it's their personal bathtub. They ferry grain, wine, olive oil, and sail. The ports aren't grand anymore, but they're active. Thessalonica remains vital, a link between Constantinople and the Adriatic. Crete, Rhodes, and the Cyclades act as stepping stones for both commerce and piracy, depending on the wind. Greek persists as the empire's dominant language in the east, but even the language is changing. Koine evolves into medieval Greek, a dialect closer to what modern Greeks will eventually speak. New idioms emerge, old vocabulary gets recycled with new meaning, bureaucratic jargon blends with liturgical phrases. You might call it Byzantine Greek, though the people themselves still call it just Greek. This period also marks the rise of iconography, religious imagery that is distinctly Greek in style and theology. Saints with long noses and golden halos. Christ with almond eyes and an unreadable gaze. Mary in blues and golds looking both human and eternal. These aren't decorative, they're spiritual tools. They replace the statues of gods, the busts of emperors. They're objects of veneration, not art. But they are art. And they're everywhere. But even this cultural flowering is threatened. In the early 8th century, the empire enters one of its most chaotic internal debates. Iconoclasm. A movement driven by emperors and theologians to ban the use of religious images entirely. They argue that icons are idolatry, that they distract from the divine. Churches are stripped of mosaics, paintings whitewashed, sculptures smashed. In Greece, the response is complex. Some cities comply, others resist. Monks are particularly vocal in their defense of icons, and in many Greek monasteries, their hidden frescoes survive behind false walls. It's an internal war, fought not with swords mostly, but with chisels and paintbrushes. It will last over a century and leave deep-seated scars, not just physical but philosophical, because to Greece images matter. This is a land that once painted gods into motion, carved ideals into stone. To deny imagery is to deny a part of its soul. The eventual triumph of iconodules, those who support icons, feels, in a strange way, like a return to form. The church wins, yes, but so does Greece. By the end of the 8th century, Greece is no longer on the margins. The chaos of the early Byzantine period is settling. The Slavs are partially integrated, sometimes forcibly. The borders are more stable, the monasteries are growing, trade is humming again. In Constantinople, the empire is experiencing a modest renaissance, and Greece is riding the tide with it. But it's no longer a land that expects glory. Those days when Greece dreamed of empire, of conquest, of philosophical supremacy, that chapter is closed. What remains is quieter, humbler and maybe wiser. A people who have survived centuries of conquest, adaptation and transformation. A culture that holds its memories like seeds, planting them carefully when the time is right. So you stand on a Greek hillside, church bells ringing in the distance, and you realise you are the sum of every era before. Macedonian courage, Roman discipline, Christian endurance, Byzantine subtlety. You are still Greece, but reborn again. Now we're in the heart of the Byzantine Middle Ages, the 9th and 10th century CE, and Greece, far from fading into irrelevance, is beginning to hum with life again. Not loudly, not in the shout of revolution or the roar of empire, but in the quiet, steady rhythm of recovery. Like an old city wall being rebuilt stone by stone, Greece is reclaiming itself, not by chasing the ghost of ancient glory, but by anchoring itself in something sturdier. Survival, tradition and faith. You can see the difference everywhere. The cities once hollowed by invasions and plague are now filling up again. Villages grow into towns. Fortified hilltops blossom into bustling communities. Farmers return to long-abandoned fields. The olive groves thrive. The vineyards stretch wide under the Mediterranean sun. Even the roads, long battered by time and disrepair, start to feel the thump of hoofbeats and the scrape of wagon wheels again. Greece is not rich, but it is resilient. The Byzantine Empire is still the overarching structure, of course. The emperor still rules from Constantinople. The church is still the soul of it all, but within this framework the Greek provinces are more active, more local, more alive than they've been in centuries. These aren't just passive satellite towns orbiting the capital, they're small worlds in themselves. Thessalonica, for example, becomes a major spiritual and commercial hub, second only to Constantinople in the empire's eastern sphere. Its harbour buzzes with trade, its churches ring with liturgy. Its walls, tested many times, still stand firm, and in the countryside something remarkable is happening. The Byzantine government, having survived the chaos of iconoclasm and a near collapse at the hands of Arab expansion, finally breathes. It begins reasserting control not with brute force, but with careful policy. New administrative districts are defined. Tax systems are adjusted. Soldiers are granted land in exchange for service, reviving the strategos model, where military leadership and civil governance blend. Greek families, some newly risen through service, established local dynasties. There were not kings or nobles in the Western European sense, but they wield real influence. They build churches, fund monasteries, sponsor local artisans. Their names appear in both legal documents and church walls carved in stone or painted in elaborate frescoes. For the first time in a while, being a provincial Greek isn't just about endurance, it's about participation. Culturally, this is a period of rich synthesis. Yes, Greek is the dominant language, but it's not quite the Greek of Thucydides. It's evolved into a fluid conversational dialect that blends high theology with everyday slang. It carries scripture as easily as it carries gossip. This is the language of homilies, of court records, of family letters written in faded ink and rolled into jars for safekeeping. Greek isn't just surviving, it's thriving, finding new ways to be relevant in a changing world. And Greek Christianity has reached full bloom. The period sees the rise of Mount Athos, a monastic republic in northern Greece that becomes the spiritual heartbeat of Orthodox Christianity. Perched on cliffs and nestled in forests, these monasteries offer more than silence and seclusion. They become the guardians of Byzantine spirituality, art, and learning. Manuscripts are copied. Icons are painted. The rhythm of prayer becomes the heartbeat of the land. Pilgrims travel from as far as Russia and Armenia to kiss the icons here, to be healed, to find peace. The monks of Mount Athos aren't just spiritual recluses, they are curators of memory. They preserve not just scripture, but fragments of Hellenistic literature, philosophical texts, and ancient commentaries. These silent scribes, barely eating, rarely speaking, are the reason future generations will still know the names of Euripides, Ptolemy, and Galen. In their cellars and scriptoria, the classical and the Christian continue their strange whispered conversation. And while the spiritual world deepens, the political one gets complicated. Greece, like the rest of Byzantium, exists in a state of uneasy vigilance. The threat of foreign invasion never fully disappears. To the west, the Bulgarians are rising, carving out their own empire, with kings who will one day convert to Christianity and enter the Byzantine game. To the east, Arab raids occasionally reach the Aegean, though not with the force of earlier centuries. Piracy becomes a constant menace, especially in the island regions and coastal towns. In response, many Greek cities and villages turn inward. Walls are fortified, watchtowers built, coastal settlements relocate further inland, the churches double as strongholds, monasteries become storehouses of food and weapons just in case. The balance between sacred and strategic becomes a way of life, and yet amidst this guarded existence, art flourishes. Iconography, suppressed during the iconoclast period, now explodes into colour and complexity. The mosaics from this era are luminous, gold backgrounds, stylized saints, intricate details so fine you can see the fold of a robe or the glint in a saint's eye. These aren't just decorations, they're theology in glass and pigment. They tell stories to people who cannot read, who don't need to. The image is the message. The music of the church, too, reaches new heights. Byzantine chant develops into a rich layered tradition that echoes through the stone halls of every basilica from Athens to Thessalonica. It's slow, hypnotic, designed to lift the mind out of the everyday and into the eternal. This isn't performance, it's participation. When the priest intones Kyrie eleison, he's not just singing, he's opening a door. Education, while not widespread, takes on a distinct shape in this period. Literacy is mostly limited to clergy, monks, and the occasional well-born merchant. But within those circles, learning matters. Boys in monasteries memorize psalms, learn to copy text with discipline, and study grammar through the lens of scripture. If you're lucky, you get exposed to the classics. Not for their pagan ideas, but for their style, their discipline, their utility in sharpening the mind. There are even fringe voices, quirky, unorthodox thinkers, who begin to imagine a future where the Greek past and Christian present are not at odds, but allies. They argue that Plato prepared the world for Christ, that Homer's heroes foreshadowed the saints, that the logos of the philosophers was always just a shadow of the logos, its heresy in some corners, in others, its genius. So what does it mean to be Greek in this time? It means being deeply orthodox, devoted to the liturgy, to the saints, to a worldview built on sacred rhythm and repetition. It means seeing time not as a forward march, but a circular dance. Feast days, fasts, and Sunday mornings all guiding you like stars in a dark sky. But it also means memory. The names of ancient cities still live. Sparta, Argos, Corinth, Delphi. Their roles may have changed, but their stories are still whispered. Parents still tell tales of Heracles to children. Not as religion, not anymore, but as legend, the way a grandmother might tell of an ancestor who once outran a storm or wrestled a bear. And through it all there's this. Greece has not disappeared. It has not bowed. It has bent and bent again, but it holds. No longer a power, perhaps, but a presence. One that continues to shape the soul of Byzantium with every syllable, every icon, every stone. You walk down a village path lined with olive trees. The sun is setting behind a whitewashed chapel. Somewhere a bell rings, a monk chants, a child laughs, a farmer prays. This is not the Greece of Homer, but it's still Greece, and it's still singing. The calendar now reads sometime in the 11th century CE, and Greece, in all its layered complexity, is settling into a new kind of normal. Not the kind of normal that implies peace necessarily, or predictability. This is Byzantium after all, and peace is always provisional, but a rhythm of life that feels deeply rooted. The wounds of invasion have scabbed over. The cracks in the marble have been painted with gold leaf. The cities breathe, the hills hum with chant, and the people, those stubborn, poetic Greeks, have learned not just how to survive under empire, but how to quietly shape it from within. If you stand on a hillside overlooking the Aegean now, you see a landscape both ancient and oddly new. Olive trees twist in the same groves where they've grown for millennia. Shepherds guide their flocks past the fallen columns of forgotten temples. In the towns, cobblestone streets wind through neighbourhoods clustered around churches, not agoras. The architecture is recognisably Byzantine. Curved arches, terracotta roofs, domes like inverted bowls set gently atop stone. But here and there, in a wall or a foundation, a bit of white marble peeks through, reused, recycled, a quiet wink from the classical past. The empire is strong again. For now, the Macedonian dynasty ruling from Constantinople has brought administrative reform, military success, and a cultural revival often called the Byzantine Renaissance. This isn't a golden age in the old sense. There are no philosophers striding the Stoa in sandals, no emperors reciting poetry in front of adoring crowds, but something is undeniably stirring. Greek identity, once diluted in the Roman bucket, now bubbles back to the surface in bold, confident strokes. Literature blossoms. In Constantinople's libraries and monasteries across Greece, scholars copy not only scripture and theology, but the old Greek texts, Plato, Sophocles, Galen. They don't just preserve these works, they annotate, comment, argue. Scholars like Michael Psellos, a Byzantine intellectual with the flair of a Greek sophist, write treatises that draw from Plato and Aristotle as easily as from the Gospels. He isn't ashamed to admire the pagan past. He insists that understanding the ancients is a pathway to understanding truth itself. And it's not just the elites who engage with culture now. In towns and villages, literacy slowly creeps outward. Parish priests teach boys to read so they can chant psalms. Some merchants learn enough letters to write ledgers and contracts. In the markets, people quote proverbs that are older than the empire itself, slightly misremembered lines from Hesiod or Sophocles, twisted by centuries of retelling. Meanwhile, the church continues to shape every part of life. Greek Christianity isn't just a religion. It's the rhythm of the calendar, the architecture of the town, the melody of daily speech. Every act, ploughing, baking, weaving, is framed in faith. The saints are no longer remote figures. They are neighbours, protectors, ancestors in the spiritual sense. Each town has its patron. Each family lights candles for a favourite. Stories of miracles pass from mouth to mouth like heirlooms. A spring cures illness because St. Paraskevi once drank from it. A cave protects travellers because St. Nicholas once prayed there. Whether true or not is beside the point. They feel true. Monasteries remain centres of power and preservation. Mount Athos thrives as the spiritual crown of the Orthodox world. Its influence spreads into every corner of Greece, not through edicts or sermons, but through quiet, unshakable example. The monks there live outside of time, it seems, chanting ancient tones, baking bread by hand, copying texts with ink made from ash and berries, and when the outside world stumbles, as it often does, people turn to them for grounding, but the outside world is stumbling again. The Seljuk Turks have risen in the east, taking Byzantine territory in Anatolia, and in 1071 the empire suffers a catastrophic defeat at the Battle of Manzikert. The news arrives in Greece not as a thunderclap, but as a long, low rumble. Most Greek towns are far from the front lines, but they feel the tremor nonetheless. Refugees arrive, families from the east with only what they can carry. Trade slows, taxes rise, rumours swirl. Still, most Greeks keep living as they always have, attentive but unpanicked. After all, this isn't the first time their empire has lost ground, nor will it be the last. They've seen emperors rise and fall, they've buried their gods and lit candles for new ones. They've survived Goths, Huns, Slavs, Arabs, pirates, plague, famine. One more invading force doesn't shake them as much as you'd think. What does feel different now is how clearly Greek identity is no longer hiding under a Roman mask. By this point, almost no one outside the court refers to the empire as Roman in the old sense. The people speak Greek. The liturgy is Greek. The bureaucracy, military, and law, all Greek. Even the imperial court, once dripping in Latin titles and Roman traditions, has long since gone native. The language of the Caesars has become a formality. Greece, in effect, has outlasted Rome within the very shell of Rome's successor. This era also brings about quirky corners of life you wouldn't expect. One bishop in Thessaly becomes locally famous not for miracles, but for his intense obsession with calendars. He insists the saints' days are misaligned by 2 days and refuses to budge. A community in Arcadia decides to revive an old harvest festival, disguising it under the Feast of St. Tryphon, complete with masked dancers and ceremonial bread that looks suspiciously like an ancient fertility offering. The church grumbles but lets it slide. Better a Christianized festival than no festival at all. There's also a quiet but fascinating cultural current. Nostalgia. Not just for the classical past, but for the Byzantine past now slipping away into memory. In Athens, old men speak fondly of the days when the city was full of students and scribes, when the shadow of the Acropolis still inspired poetry, not just awe. Some even take to calling it the old school, as if classical learning were a family heirloom half buried in dust. And yet things are not Greece, once a battered frontier, is now the cultural heartland of a reshaped empire. The border may lie far to the east, but the identity, orthodox, Greek, enduring, beats strongest here. It's a role the land never asked for, but one it's suited to play. There's a comfort in familiarity, in liturgy, in olive trees, in knowing the exact rhythm of the bells on Sunday morning. But as always, there are shadows on the horizon. The empire is losing territory. The crusading West has begun to peer hungrily at Constantinople. The church in Rome has grown increasingly estranged. In 1054, the Great Schism becomes official. East and West divided not just by politics, but by faith. The Pope and the Patriarch excommunicate each other like two neighbours arguing over a fence. In Greece, the reaction is weary, not dramatic, not apocalyptic, just another chapter in a long book where no one gets along for very long. And so you sit in a Greek village, let's say it's somewhere in the Peloponnese, and watch the sun dip below the hills. Smoke rises from chimney pots, a goat bleats in the distance. A woman sings a lullaby her grandmother learned from her grandmother, the melody older than anyone remembers. A boy walks past a crumbling statue, kicks a pebble at its feet and doesn't even look up. He has homework to do, he has prayers to say, he has tomorrow to live. This is a Greece you won't find in marble textbooks. Not glorious, not tragic, just human. But it's alive, and still telling its story. It's the 12th century now, and Greece finds itself teetering on a strange and delicate balance, caught between memory and momentum, heritage and hazard. It's no longer the ancient land of city-states or the quiet province of an all-consuming Rome. It's not even just a sleepy corner of Byzantium. Greece is at last something all its own again. Not independent, not sovereign, but unmistakably Greek, in a way that feels proud, deep-rooted, and just a little bit anxious. Because for the first time in centuries, people here are starting to sense that something is about to change, and not necessarily for the better. On the surface, life seems stable, even thriving. The Byzantine Empire under the Komnenian dynasty has clawed its way back from near ruin. Alexios and Komnenos and his successors have restructured the military, reformed taxation, and brought a measure of prosperity and order back to the eastern Mediterranean. Greece, sitting snugly along vital trade routes and rich in agriculture, benefits immensely. Cities grow again, ports like Corfu, Patras, and Volos swell with merchants speaking half a dozen languages. The villages bloom, grain flows. Olive oil shines in amphorae stacked like golden bricks. Monasteries are restored. Churches repainted. The bells ring bright and early, and the chant rolls smooth across morning air. But underneath it all, the ground is trembling. Not with literal earthquakes, though those still happen too because Greece can't help itself, but with tension, pressure, a sense that the world beyond is crowding in faster than Byzantium can handle. The Seljuk Turks remain a thorn in the east, though they've been checked for now, but it's the west, of all places, that now casts the longest shadow. Because here come the Crusaders. At first it seems promising. Christian knights from Western Europe answering the call to reclaim the Holy Land? Sure. Maybe they'll help Byzantium restore lost territory, secure trade routes, even bring some fresh energy to the cause. But by now, Greece has learned guests don't always leave, and when they do, they tend to take something with them. The First Crusade passes through relatively peacefully, though the cultural whiplash is real. Imagine being a Greek farmer watching mail-clad Frenchmen try to haggle in bad Latin for goats, or Western priests scoffing at the Greek liturgy like they've never heard a proper chant before. Still, things remain civil. Tense, but civil. It's the later Crusades where things go sideways. By the time of the Fourth Crusade in 1204, everything explodes. The Crusaders, originally bound for Egypt, are diverted, through a series of bad debts, broken promises, and political manoeuvring, right into the heart of Byzantium. And then, unthinkably, they sack Constantinople. Not Muslims, not Persians, not Huns, Christians, fellow Christians. and they tear the city apart like wolves around a wounded lion. Greece doesn't experience this catastrophe directly, but the aftershocks are immediate and brutal. With the capital ransacked, the empire fragments. What was once a single, if fragile imperial system fractures into competing states. The Latin Empire, run by Western Crusaders, the Empire of Nicaea, a Byzantine rump state trying to regroup, the Despotate of Epirus tucked away in western Greece, and the Empire of Trebizond clinging to the Black Sea coast like a desperate sailor. In Greece itself, chaos unfolds. The Crusaders carve up the land like it's a roast boar at a wedding feast. French and Italian lords take over cities and islands. They call themselves dukes and counts and despots, renaming everything in a clumsy Latin accent. They import feudal structures foreign to Greek soil. Castles rise where monasteries once stood. Greek bishops are deposed and replaced with Latin ones. Churches are seized, icons smashed, saints defiled. The Orthodox liturgy is banned in some places. In others, it survives underground, like a flame shielded by cupped hands. This isn't just conquest, it's cultural erasure. And the Greeks don't forget. For ordinary people, life grows uncertain. Some areas adjust quickly, especially those long used to trade with the West. Others resist. A few Greek nobles flee to the hills, some swear loyalty to the Latin rulers, hoping to protect their families. Others look east, praying for the return of the empire, even a broken one. Everywhere, there's a sense that something sacred has been violated. Not just land, but language, memory, identity. And yet, through the confusion, Greece does what it always does, it endures. Monasteries once again become sanctuaries, not just of faith, but of Greekness itself. The monks write in Greek, sing in Greek, pray to saints with Greek names and stories. They teach children the alphabet. They preserve scrolls. They paint icons in secret, using crushed berries and soot. Even if the ruling baron has no idea what they're doing, a cross is still a cross, but it matters how it's made, and whose language blesses it. The old Byzantine nobles who remain try to reclaim their influence. Some collaborate with the Latins to survive, others scheme to drive them out. In Epirus, a Greek-speaking mini-empire arises, fiercely orthodox and fiercely anti-Latin. It's messy, disorganised, but it keeps the flame alive, and it sends a message. Greece isn't done yet. Back in the villages, people continue with their lives, because what else is there to do? The taxes are heavier, the rulers speak funny, and some churches now feature unfamiliar saints in even more unfamiliar clothing. But the olives still grow, the goats still need tending, the bells still ring, if not quite at the right time. Somehow through it all, a deep, almost genetic resilience surfaces again. The same one that adapted to Roman conquest, that baptized the old gods, that survived Slavic invasions and theological earthquakes. It stirs now in the markets of Nafplio, in the alleys of Monimvasia, in the fishermen's prayers on Chios. The names may change, the maps may shift. But the people remember, and perhaps most poetic of all, Latin rule in Greece doesn't last. It splinters, collapses. The various Latin principalities eventually wither under local resistance, economic failure, or internal dysfunction. By the mid-13th century, the Empire of Nicaea retakes Constantinople, and Byzantium, battered, humbled, patched together with duct tape and prayer, returns to the stage. It's not what it once was, but neither is Greece. This land is no longer the philosophical workshop of the world or the gleaming prize of empires. It's something different now, a patchwork of memory and faith, of cities and stones, of survival and stubborn, unyielding identity. You stand now in a field where once stood a temple, then a church, then a tower. The wind carries the chant of a distant monastery. A goat chews on a patch of thistle beside a marble slab etched with forgotten names. And you realise you're not just walking through history, you're walking through a palimpsest. Greece isn't a single story, it's dozens. Written over each other, fading, bleeding, but never erased. So here we are at the end of a long, winding journey. A journey through ruins and empires, through forgotten gods and remembered saints, through battles no one really won and stories no one fully forgot. Greece, that stubborn sliver of mountains and islands, tucked into the eastern Mediterranean, never got to rest for very long. Someone was always marching in, or sailing in, or crusading in. But somehow it never quite disappeared. It shifted, blended, reassembled. You've watched it go from independent city-states loud with debate and drama into the disciplined embrace of Roman law. You felt the tremors of Roman steel as Greece was claimed, broken, and rebuilt. You heard the echo of sandals on marble fade into the quieter shuffle of monks on monastery floors, and through it all, you saw the Greek soul, curious, poetic, stubborn, refuse to go quiet. By the end of our tale, Greece isn't ruling the world, it's not even ruling itself, but it's still here, still writing, still whispering prayers in the same language used by Homer and Hesiod, even if the gods they whisper to have changed. Maybe that's the real story. Not one of conquest or collapse, but of continuity. Greece teaches you that history isn't just about who won, it's about who remembers, who adapt, who keeps singing long after the stage lights go out. So if you're still awake, well, I'm impressed. But if your eyelids are heavy, if your thoughts are swimming through marble courtyards and Byzantine domes, then perfect. That's what we came here to do. Now close your eyes, let the last flickers of candlelight fade. Let the ghosts of philosophers and monks and marble-faced saints slip back into the shadows. Greece is sleeping now, and so should you.